G'day, mate. 40 here. So apparently 3 United States servicemen were just killed in Jordan. I didn't know we had troops in Jordan. Is it really in America's best interest to have troops in Jordan? Let's get something here from Fox News.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fox News Live. I'm Arthel Neville. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Arthel, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. You know, for weeks, the Biden administration has been accused of not responding forcefully enough against the continuing attacks by Iranian-backed proxies like the Houthis, who have been targeting shipping and our forces. Now, the tragedy that many feared has been realized. Will President Biden...
Wait a second. This is really strange framing of the story. It's not really that the United States has not been responding forcefully enough. It's about why does the United States have so many military forces and bases in the Middle East, including in countries where we're not wanted, such as Syria? Right? We have military bases in Syria against the will of the Syrian government. All right, that's insane. Like, why do we have military bases in Jordan?
Respond as President Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s when Iran attacked our forces. Reagan retaliated against Iranian assets directly and took out half of Iran's navy. In a statement released moments...
Yeah, and Iranian-based proxy forces, killed approximately 350 U.S. Marines out of Lebanon in, 1982, 83, and then the United States promptly left the country and withdrew its forces.
Ago, President Biden says that the attack was carried out by radical Iran-backed militant groups and operating in Syria and Iraq. The question, what will happen
Let's go
next?
to Lucas.
The radical Iranian-backed forces. Okay, so first of all, I doubt that these forces are acting at the direction of Iran. All right, these are forces, these are entities that have their own interests that are not always identical with that of Iran, and they operate independently of Iran's wishes. I would guarantee you that Iran did not command direct attacks on U.S. forces because it's not in Iran's interest to have some kind of direct military battle with the United States. And then as far as them being radical, yeah, I suspect that these groups are radical in the pursuit of their self-interest. That's why I like Narcos. I just watched the 8-part Netflix series Gazelle about the drug king woman, godmother, Griselda Blanco. And I love these stories because you get raw, unfiltered human nature in its desires for fame, for pleasure, for power, and for status, and for command, and for just, wiping out one's enemies, taking revenge. Right? We all have these impulses in the narco trade as it's portrayed in these various dramas. It's just so raw. That was the other fun thing about covering the pornography industry, is that there was a lot less repression. All right, a lot more honesty in some things than you get in regular life.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Eric. Let's go to Lucas Tomlinson now. He's live at the White House. Lucas, what more can you tell us?
Well, Arthel, this is the deadliest attack on American forces in the Middle East since the October 7th Hamas massacre. As you mentioned last night, a drone strike killed 3 U.S. troops and wounded 25 at a base in northeast Jordan near the border with Syria. That's according to the White House. President Biden releasing a statement moments ago which says, quote, "While we are still gathering the facts of the attack, we know it was carried out by radical Iran-backed militant groups operating in Syria and Iraq. Jill and I join the families and friends of our fallen and Americans across the country in grieving the loss of these warriors in this despicable and wholly unjust attack." Now, there have been now over 159 attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, and now Jordan over the past 3 months. The U.S. has responded with airstrikes in Iraq and Syria.
And remember, U.S. forces are not wanted in Syria, right? They are imposed on Syria against the wishes of the Syrian government. If China had military forces in the United States, right, you don't think we'd try to attack those?
Syria, but the bulk have been in Yemen since the beginning of the month. There have been increasing calls, as you mentioned, Eric, for the U.S. to strike back much harder. U.S. warships continue shooting down drones and missiles from Iran's proxy forces off the coast of Yemen. There have also been calls for the U.S. to strike the source, and that's inside Iran. The names of those fallen has not been released yet.
So there's an enormously powerful, influential, but very tiny in numbers lobby in the U.S. for direct military conflagration with Iran, which I believe would be an absolute disaster. But you see this lobby exposed most dramatically on Fox News, which has been lobbying for direct American war with Iran for what, at least 15 years now?
Subject to next of kin notifications. Eric and Arthel.
All right, Lucas Tomlinson, thank you very much, live at the White House. And right now joining us on the phone is Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin. Jennifer, any word from the Pentagon?
Well, Arthel, we have received a notification from CENTCOM, a statement in which they confirm the deaths of those 3 U.S. troops. But I'm also hearing reports that up to 25 Americans may have been injured in that attack on the base in northern Jordan. This is a very significant escalation, as Lucas reported. This is bound to test not only the White House, but also U.S. Central.
Okay, so if you have a lot of inviting targets and you strongly incentivize attacks on those targets, then inevitably you're going to have conflicts like this. But what's really going on is not that one particular Iranian proxy force, finally attacked the United States. It's like, why do we have so many inviting targets in the Middle East when our primary geopolitical enemy, when our primary geopolitical rival is China, right? This is just a distraction. We have no vital national strategic security interests here, and yet we have this crazy number of U.S. bases. It's akin to encouraging young women to dress in a particularly alluring and slutty fashion and walk in bad parts of town where there's very little effective law enforcement. What do you think is going to happen?
Command, we know that there has been a great deal of frustration among top senior U.S. military officials, thinking that that the U.S. needed to strike back harder against Iran, that Iran was not.
Yeah, so that's the frustration that gets articulated, but I suspect the frustration in the U.S. military that does not get articulated is, why are we sitting out here as sitting ducks for these kind of attacks when there aren't any vital U.S. strategic interests at heart? Greetings, glad to see you recovered enough to straight. Yeah, so I don't know. Tell me about your flu and COVID experience. So last Friday evening, I just felt a profound lethargy. I just didn't want to do anything. So for about 30 hours, I was just lethargic. I didn't want to gather my documents to file my taxes for year 2023. I didn't want to gather my proof of health insurance documentation. I didn't want to gather my my new CPAP and put it together with the hose and the face mask and all that. I didn't want to get it all together. And then boom, after about 24 to 38 hours of feeling lethargic, then boom, the flu hit me, and hit me pretty hard. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday started to recover. I walked about 2 miles. Wednesday, walked and biked about 6 miles, so I started feeling better. And now, I don't know what flu and COVID is like for you. For me, I'm pretty sure this was the flu. Now I'm in the depression phase. So my father, after a strong bout of the flu, he would also feel depressed often for weeks afterwards. And so I'm kind of in the depressed lull after getting the flu. Then last night I had some cheese enchiladas, and about 2 hours later, I wanted to engage in an Australian yawn. And it's like, I just felt increasingly crummy last night. It's like, oh no, I'm getting a relapse. All my hopes and dreams, all my plans are going to be for naught. I don't want to do the Australian yawn again. So what did I do? I turned to Kroger's maximum strength stomach relief. I took a good swig of this and got some sleep and starting to feel much better. Brandon says, norovirus is a common stomach flu going around. Incidentally, shouldn't Dennis Prager enforce higher modesty standards on his co-host Julia Hartman? I don't think so, because modesty standards are relative to are partly relative to the surrounding culture. Dennis Prager is not an Orthodox Jew, so for the culture that Dennis and Julie swim in, I think most of the time she's perfectly normal. And modesty is not even necessarily primarily about dress, right? It's in large part demeanor, right? So you can dress in a highly modest way and have a highly slutty demeanor. So There's a saying in marginal parts of more modern Orthodox Jewish life that the longer the skirt, all right, the more modest the skirt, the quicker it comes off, God forbid. And there's not a strict correlation there. But yeah, I mean, I'm personally attracted to women who look very nice, very prim, and act in a very proper fashion in public, but behind closed doors, they're a lot less inhibited. But yeah, there are many dimensions for modesty beyond dress. Dress, particularly with women, is probably the most important component because men are so visually focused. But get a little bit more here from Fox.
Getting the deterrent message. As Lucas mentioned, there have been 159 attacks on almost daily on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria and now Jordan. It was only a matter of time before some of those.
So Muslims punch way above their weight in acts of terrorism, and they're the most formidable religious-based force in the world today. But what you frequently get with many Muslim attacks, and where October 7 was particularly an exception, is a very high degree of incompetence. So what was most stunning thing for me about the October 7 Hamas attacks on southern Israel was the high degree of competence exhibited by Hamas and the very low degree of competence exhibited by Israel, which goes against stereotypes. All right, we tend to think of the Israelis as being more competent. And the Houthis certainly attracting a lot of attention, but don't seem to be particularly competent.
Single attacks against ships. I think they're finding difficulty in targeting. They're also, I suspect, finding it difficult to stay concealed until they can fire.
The continued fallout from the tensions in the Middle East, and a tanker with links to the UK was on fire for several hours in the Gulf of Aden earlier today, after being hit by a missile fired by the Houthi rebels. The Iran-backed movement, based in Yemen, of course, said that it had targeted the Marlin Loanda on Friday in response to what it described as American-British aggression. Well, the UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has called the attack intolerable and illegal. Let's speak to Chris Parry now, who is former Royal Navy Rear Admiral. He's also served as a Director General at the Ministry of Defence and as a NATO commander himself. Chris, hello, good evening.
Good evening, Daryl.
Just a series, just the latest really, a series of attacks, this, isn't it, in the Red Sea, that just do not seem to be letting up.
Well, yeah, they're getting a bit sporadic, though. If you remember, they started with a big wave of drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles. And since they've been attacked and quite a lot of their systems have been destroyed, what we're seeing now is almost single attacks against ships. I think they're finding difficulty in targeting. They're also, I suspect, finding it difficult to stay concealed until they can fire.
Oh, I think we lost.
Wow, we get these long breaks, pauses. I'm trying to run a professional show. This is simply not acceptable.
Benjamin Netanyahu is suspected of having the desire to continue the war for as long as possible, because during wartime, obviously, the nation is, to all intents and purposes, united around the war effort, and therefore it's considered inappropriate to talk politics.
So at least 159 attacks on U.S. forces since October 17. Yeah, because they're there, right? It's in Iran's interests and in the interests of large parts of the Arab Islamic world to drive American forces out of the Middle East. Like, what country, what people, what group, what nationality, what religion wants the military forces of an outgroup occupying the high ground in military terms, cultural terms, economic terms in your own land? Like, every living thing wants to create the conditions around it most suitable for its thriving.
Politics.
Now, 4 months into the Israel-Gaza conflict, Benjamin Netanyahu faces a war on the home front too, amid mounting political pressures. The Israeli Prime Minister has been accused of failing to foresee the Hamas attacks. Polls show.
Yeah, this is a fascinating case of a divergence in interest between Bibi Netanyahu and Israel, right? Bibi Netanyahu wants to continue the war for as long as possible to avoid being ousted as political leader. Probably not in Israel's best interests or America's best interests or the best interests of the countries surrounding Israel.
So he would lose an election. He could even face jail. Matthew Campbell, foreign features editor for The Times and Sunday Times, has been writing about this.
Right. Again, this is why I like Narcos dramas. There's a terrific 80-part series from Colombian TV on the life and times of Pablo Escobar. And as I was watching that show, I developed an emotional and rational understanding why so many people in Latin America engage in the drug trade. So why would strongly identifying in-group care about negative consequences to an out-group. So it suddenly made sense to me why people in Latin America would want to profit from the drug trade when the victims of the drug trade, as they see it anyway, are primarily gringos or members of an out-group. So there are many things that TV and film does better than novels. But the one thing that a novel does better than any other medium is show you an interior point of view. So, what's it like for the participants? But you can sometimes get that from movies and TV. And what I liked in the Griselda show, you could see her, you could identify with her, right? This horribly murderous, cold-blooded, vicious drug kingpin. And you could identify with her just trying to make her way in the world, trying to gain revenge against men who'd screwed her over, sometimes literally. And the abuse and the sexism that she would encounter, but you were able to identify somewhat with her, and these raw drives that nature and evolution have imprinted in all of us for pleasure, for power, for strength, right, for financial security, right, these base drives, you see them in such an unfiltered way with these narco dramas like Griselda on Netflix, which was a fun 8-part series. And then you see it also with the behavior of Bibi Netanyahu, where he is strongly incentivized to continue this war in the Middle East for as long as possible to avoid losing political power.
He's with us now. Morning.
Morning, Chloe.
So how much pressure, real pressure, is Benjamin Netanyahu under at home?
Well, he is under enormous pressure from conflicting sides. On the one hand, you've got his right wing, which is worried that he's not actually going in hard enough in Gaza and that he should be doing more. While Netanyahu is under attack in Europe and in America for inflicting devastation and enormous suffering on Gaza with the deaths of 25,000 Palestinians, 3/4 of them women and children, we are told. On the right wing, it's considered that he's not basically pursuing the war with enough vigor, and that they shouldn't be letting in humanitarian aid, and that they should be basically moving the population of Khan Yunis. That's this town in the south of Gaza, home to about 200,000 people, and the latest focus of intense fighting, that they should be relocated somewhere. So there's that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you've got.
Well, it's like old times. We've got Ricardo in the chat. We've got Elliot Blatt, Autistic Merit. All right, so this is my favorite song these days. The sun is high. It's the start of a long, hot summer. All right, it's almost the end of the National Football League season, so we're gonna have to find ways to sustain ourselves over the next 9 lonely months. But here's an opportunity for you and I hanging out with each other. And if someday we find we ever have to say goodbye, we'll be running back these memories to relive time after time, because these are the days of our lives that we'll always remember. Is to the craziest times that we've been through together. These are the days.
The families of the hostages that are still being held in these appalling conditions.
What is it about Ricardo? Like, bro, every time I see you, I just want to break out into song. Not in a gay way.
Tunnels in Gaza. 100 have been released in December. There are still 137 or so, I'm told. Some of them may not be alive, but there's a session of talks going on in Paris today, actually, on this question to negotiate a ceasefire. And it's hoped that this might result in a month's ceasefire, allowing another wave of hostages to be released. First of all, women and children, the injured, and then perhaps another month's cessation of hostages.
Look, just as much as you, I want to get to the women of the far right swimsuit edition. But there's all this breaking news, right? 3 U.S. servicemen killed in Jordan. How can we look away from the Middle East? All right, get to the women of the far right soon.
Facilities for the remainder of hostages to be released, men and soldiers who've been.
So if you want to hear the voice of the establishment, right, super establishment perspectives on the news, I like Times Radio, right? It's a podcast, live streaming, talk radio format by the Times of London newspaper.
Captured in the fighting.
From a political, I was just going to say, from a political perspective, does it benefit Benjamin Netanyahu to keep the war going? Because presumably no nation wants to get rid of their leader during wartime. But if there was to be an end to the war, or even a lengthy ceasefire, could that give critics time to oust him?
Well, you put your finger on this very interesting, yeah.
Right. So the world can look very different in a short period of time. So 2 months ago, John J. Mearsheimer was saying he could conceive of no possible way that the West would stop arming Ukraine. The United States would stop arming Ukraine, whether Donald Trump was in power, whether Joe Biden gets reelected. he saw as far out as we can look that the U.S. is going to keep funding Ukraine. Now, right, the U.S. House of Representatives has refused to sign off on aid for Ukraine and still balking at signing off on new aid for Ukraine and aid for Israel. And in Europe, right, we've got this growing populist movement that also doesn't want to fund Ukraine. So times can change very quickly, right? 2 months ago, it looked like absolute U.S. political reality and consensus that we would continue funding Ukraine. Now,
the
not
risk,
so
obviously,
much.
with some of the right-wing populists, and that's a risk across the Atlantic as well as here, is their desire to come to terms with Putin on terms that might be much more appealing to Putin than he would currently get.
The European Union faces European Parliament elections, and this week a report by the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a Berlin-based think tank, forecasts that anti-EU populists will either be the largest party or dominant in 18 of the 27 EU member states. So what would this so-called political earthquake across the continent this June look like, and how might it affect us?
Right, so this isn't primarily about funding, right? This is primarily about a distrust of elites, right? There's a growing populist backlash throughout the First World, right, against the consensus of elites, and this is just one reflection of that. Right, back here to Times of London. How Europe's growing far-right populism will affect Ukraine and the war.
Stephen Rogers was the British permanent representative to the EU under David Cameron, and Theresa May. Welcome to joining us here on Times Radio.
Good morning.
First of all, do you share the misgivings that are reflected in this European Council on Foreign Relations survey that there is a storm coming of a rise of populism in the European Union?
Well, I don't know whether they're misgivings. I think it's a very interesting piece of work, analysis and polling. I think it's quite likely to be reasonably accurate. I think Europe is collectively going to move further to the right, and the conventional right, if I can put it like that, a combination of the Gaullists and the Christian Democrats, are suffering a bit, although they will gain some seats in Spain, I think, and no doubt one or two other places. And it's various elements of the more populist further right that are likely to gain most. And the Social Democrats will, I suspect, lose ground. Probably Emmanuel Macron's more centrist party may.
So, yeah, usually the perspectives, opinions, desires of a majority will not count for much in foreign policy. But under certain circumstances, right, you're getting this growing revolt against elites, which will lead to probably genuine foreign policy changes. We're already seeing that in the US, right? We haven't, turned over billions more to Ukraine, and this is sweeping Europe.
Lose ground as well. So I think the analysis is probably pretty accurate. Then comes the question of what that might mean if it happens.
Wait,
So in the United States, right, very few elections get decided on foreign policy, but the way things are breaking right now in foreign policy, pundits from the left or the right, and I believe they're correct, right? This is all breaking in the interests of Donald Trump and against the interests of Joe Biden. This is Ross Douthat 3 days ago.
I'm just saying George W. Bush should have won by more, which could be cited as proof that only elites cared about foreign policy in that election, or it could be cited as proof that actually the Kerry shtick was fairly effective. It just wasn't effective enough to overcome Bush's advantage on the economy, which again is not.
So if I were president of the United States, what would I do about this? I would get our forces out of the Middle East. I don't see any vital strategic or national security interests that we have in being in the Middle East. So I would pull our forces out. All right, that's far more important than saving face. Right? Saving face doesn't really matter much in terms of international power, right? There are two things that determine international power, right? Your economic power and your military power, right? Making a shambolic exit from Vietnam or from Afghanistan, right? That gets a ton of coverage in the news media, and they'll try to correlate that with Joe Biden's low poll numbers that they plunged after America's shambolic exit from Afghanistan. But that's just the nonsense that pundits talk about, right? What determines your international power is economic power and military power. It is not determined by the grace and ease with which you exit a conflict. All right, sometimes it's far better to get out of a fight ungracefully, humiliatingly, than to gracefully hang around in a fight that's against your national security interests. So if I were president of the United States, I would be primarily focused on containing the rise of China, and I would withdraw aid from Ukraine. I would stop aiding Israel. I think Israel is strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet. I think it's both in America's best interest and Israel's best interest if there was a more distant relationship between the United States and Israel. And I'd pull American forces out of the Middle East, let the peoples and the countries and the nations and the religions of the Middle East, fight and create, their own existence free of American interference. All right, we don't have any vital national security interests going on there.
Not how anyone remembers that election. I agree, but that's what the economic fundamentalists would say.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think that the other question that I have is like, how do you define what is a foreign issue and what is a domestic issue? And, I have this theory that things that happen abroad sort of take time to kind of percolate through the aquifer of American politics and become domestic issues. And I think like the Iraq War, it took some time for like what was happening over there to sort of fully work its way into our politics over here. And I think one of the things that I'm wondering in this moment is like, has that time continuum actually collapsed? Like, obviously we're living in the latter days of globalization and the smaller world and all of that kind of stuff. But it does feel like, things out there and things right here are collapsing into our politics in a closer way. And that's partly because of migration. And
okay, I'm going to jump in here and say
I'm just trying to figure out how to spell aquifer. I'm just looking it up. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm going to draw the distinction with the Iraq War. We had troops on the ground. We had lots of troops on the ground. We had troops on the ground in Afghanistan. We do not have troops on the ground right now. So you can collapse all you want to, but people are not going to care about Ukraine.
We don't have troops on the ground. All right, this was recorded 3 days ago, right? After 3 American service members were just killed in Jordan.
Situation that I think could be the exception is Israel.
Yeah.
The Gaza war has become a domestic policy issue that is splitting along unusual political lines. And I do think that Israel tends to be unique, but I think it is the exception to the rule.
Yeah. But I think that there's something to this notion that, we expect a commander-in-chief to have a certain kind of Ross flecked at this, the Afghanistan withdrawal moment for Biden. I mean, that was the moment when his approval rating went negative, and
right.
it hasn't recovered since. Why do you think that was such a kind of hinge point for the Biden presidency?
I mean, I don't think we know for sure that Biden's approval ratings wouldn't have started sinking without that, right? It was an inflection point. But I think, if you'd flash forward 6 months or a year and asked voters what they cared about and why they were down on Joe Biden, they would have mostly said inflation and gas prices.
Look, Joe Biden's never been popular, right? He's never been popular over the course of his political career. So why Joe Biden drops in polls, it's not really that significant a question. The question is, why is he ever briefly popular? He won the 2020 election because enough voters in the suburbs changed the direction of their vote from 2016 towards the Democrats because they were revolting against Donald Trump.
Right, not Afghanistan. And even when the Washington Post published their version of the Pentagon Papers as the Afghanistan Papers, showing sort of how, America's military and political leadership had sort of botched Afghanistan without admitting it for years and years and years, none of that made a huge difference politically. What made a huge difference politically was, 1, things are going really badly, and 2, our soldiers are there. I think a question is whether social media in that creates that kind of immediacy that you're talking about, Lydia, even for crises that don't involve American troops directly. That seemed to be true at least for the beginning of the Ukraine war. American boots weren't on the ground, but we had this kind of crazy sort of transmission of not just images, but video and, sort of you could watch the war unfold, right? And there's been versions of that with Israel and Gaza. But I'm less sure how much that changes American public opinion as opposed to crazy online discourse, which are still overlapping, but not completely the same thing.
I think there's another way in which the withdrawal from Afghanistan has an impact. Whether it's sort of a lasting enough impact to matter in the election later this year, I don't know. But the thing about the Afghanistan withdrawal is that in a way it was sort of Biden decisiveness saying this is never going to be good, so we just have to get out. But it looked like it sort of made him seem like he was not in control of a situation, as the way it unfolded so chaotically. And so in that sense, the way Biden ended up looking, weakened his kind of the overall perception of voters who would care about foreign policy, even in this kind of minimalist way.
If you listen to people on the campaign trail talk about Biden versus Trump, you'll get a fair number of them that are like, yes, Trump is crazy. He is bombastic. He is erratic. He is unhinged. But that's what we need in this scary time because he's dealing with crazy people. So it is Trump's projection of strength that these folks like, even though they acknowledge that it is not exactly a sort of balanced approach.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because if you see the way the debate about Ukraine is playing out, the Ukraine funding is playing out, which is a sort of classic foreign policy issue, the trade-off that is being pushed is explicitly like, we don't want to fund the war in Ukraine unless we secure our southern border. And which of those is a domestic issue and which of those is a foreign issue? I think most people would think of immigration as being largely a domestic issue, but it's striking to me that those are the things that are being discussed. I mean, our colleague Tom Friedman argued this week that, funding the war in Ukraine with no cost of American troops is the best security bargain. And that's sort of one perspective, right? But I think that there is a very real discussion going on about, how we're spending money. And I think that's a very politically potent question.
Well, Trump's republicanism is very isolationist, and that is one way that he is bashing Nikki Haley on the trail, which is that she's a warmonger. She is the
Right. So John Mearsheimer said that he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2020 after voting for Bernie in the primaries. He voted for Joe Biden. He voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, Joe Biden in 2020, because he thought that these two would be better for securing and developing our alliances with allies, which is incredibly important. But the number of missteps for unnecessary, risky interventions overseas, I would suspect that Mearsheimer now at least regrets his 2020 vote. So, yeah, on the face of it, Joe Biden and the Democrats appear more competent at developing our alliances, which is integral part of maintaining American dominance in the world. And so on just that issue on its face, I think the Democrats are more competent, better situated. I think that Donald Trump, unnecessarily strained, damaged our relations with allies, such as going against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But then Joe Biden and his foreign policy team just outdid all the benefits of working with allies, in that they started working with allies towards, crazily, unnecessarily risky things like fomenting a war with Russia in Ukraine, and fomenting a war with China over Taiwan, and fomenting war in the Middle East.
The old school hawkish Republican. I mean, and Ross, you kind of have sympathies in that direction.
I have some sympathy.
Yeah.
I have some sympathy for that critique of Nikki Haley. Yeah, I mean, I think that but to keep it on the, what hurts presidents, right? I think what unites the border and foreign policy is that they are areas where you can say that presidents get punished by voters for a perception of the world being out of control.
Yeah.
And I think this is generally one of Biden's problems, that even though the U.S. and its allies have done reasonably well in propping up Ukraine, right, that when you combine Russia invading Ukraine with our southern border is out of control, with war in the Middle East, and the Red Sea shipping lanes are being closed, and Iran and Pakistan are firing missiles at each other, which maybe from a grand strategy point of view doesn't matter to the U.S., but adds to this sense of a world where the Pax Americana is breaking down. And so it's not even sort of one discrete foreign policy crisis that's the problem, it's the whole thing. And this is where the sort of crude heuristic of, Donald Trump seems tough and Joe Biden doesn't, can matter politically, because the reality is that a lot of these crises were not happening during Trump's presidency, which was chaotic in other ways, but Putin invaded during Biden's presidency.
Yep.
Hamas attacked during Biden's presidency. And I think that is the kind of thing that voters pay attention to.
And Trump explicitly claims credit for it not happening on his watch.
Yep.
Let's leave it there. But before we go to the break, I want to read a listener email we got from Kevin. Kevin writes, Biden would have more support if his foreign policies were as sensible and humane as his domestic policies. He should end our war with Russia, our Gaza genocide, and our trade war with China. Wow. Let's unpack that.
So I'm not sure that this one seems to stick like it used to.
I think you can see in Kevin's email, the listener email that we read just before the break, one of the reasons why the current set of foreign policy crises doesn't help Joe Biden, because Kevin was basically arguing for a mix of policies that could all be classified as sort of on the left in the sense of being sort of, anti-war, anti-intervention. But that combination really doesn't map onto
any sort of political constituency network.
Exactly.
Maps onto Kevin.
Talking about a conflict in incentives, all right? You want to get into U.S. foreign policy, right? You want to become part of the elite in American foreign policy. What's going to give more meaning and excitement and prestige to you? An interventionist foreign policy or a non-interventionist foreign policy? Obviously, you can have more excitement and more opportunities to be doing something that looks prestigious, all right? You're saving the world. You're stopping genocide if you have an interventionist foreign policy. So the incentives for the people carrying out foreign policy for the United States run in the opposite direction of the best interests of the United States, which is generally for a non-military interventionist foreign policy.
Well, I mean, it does. It maps onto, I should say, a small and specific part of the American left, but that is not that significant. The sort of normal democratic stance has been we should support Ukraine's war with Russia. They don't say our war with Russia. And then there's a kind of bipartisan consensus right now that we need to be tougher on China, although that has critics on the left and on the center. And then Gaza and Israel is the issue that just clearly divides Biden's coalition in big and important ways domestically. And, having an issue front and center that divides your coalition is just not helpful when you're running for re-election.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that
there's a truism for you.
Yeah, I mean, the Israel-Gaza situation does feel really different from most foreign policy issues and different from the way that Israel issues have played out in the past. The thing about the situation in Israel and in Gaza that I think is specifically perilous for Joe Biden is that there's specific constituencies in his coalition that may just not show up because they're really angry and upset about the way that Joe Biden has comported himself. I look at the state of Michigan, right, which is always a battleground state and is, he won very, very narrowly. There is a significant Arab American vote in Michigan that just seeing these interviews with Muslim voters in swing states and saying, I've never in my life been a single issue voter, but now I'm a single issue voter and this is my issue. So I think it's, yes, it's foreign policy, but it's clear that there are, other voters who really like Joe Biden's, staunch support of Israel and that will politically be important for him. But I do think that in very ways specific to this situation, it's likely to play out domestically in what's going to be a very close election.
Oh, I think you're totally right. And it goes beyond even the Arab American community. I mean, this has become a part of American culture wars. You have younger voters, younger progressives in particular. And again, I have college students and, a high school senior and their friends and stuff. They talk about this as a defining issue as whether or not they support Joe Biden. And it has become like an international version of Black Lives Matter to some degree. And in fact, you see Black Lives Matter and a lot of Black activists aligning with the pro-Palestinian movement and turning it into a much bigger issue. You get a lot of talk about colonizers and oppressors, and it has just kind of folded itself into other issues that are really, really hot button issues domestically.
I mean, it toppled 2 college presidents.
Yeah, you have university presidents being hauled before Congress and run out for not being sufficiently hard on anti-Semitism on their campuses, theoretically. So it is spiraling.
Although that's not why the Harvard president was
ousted, it is exactly why they went after her.
Yeah, but she survived that part of it. She didn't survive what C is for, what it's all about. There are people who see American foreign policy as mainly a means of national security, like protecting the American people from foreign threats, protecting your allies, securing the border, controlling immigration. In this world, for instance, Ukraine doesn't matter, right? Yep. Then there are Americans who see foreign policy mainly as a way to project and spread American values, or what they believe should be, bedrock American values, and that's human rights or freedom or prosperity. In this world, supporting Ukraine can be urgent.
Yeah, and there's just no evidence that we can do that effectively. All right, it is the plaything of a highly influential neoconservative group, which has very little popular support.
In this world, you become a single issue voter over what's happening in Gaza. So it's not just how people feel about this part of the world, or it's also what they think American power is for.
But generally, I think the second group tends to be much smaller than the first group. The kind of people who affirmatively care about using U.S. power to shape events in distant lands are a narrower, they're a more elite, if we will, sort of, or, well-educated, very politically engaged group. Whereas...
Yeah, so usually in foreign policy, a tiny number of elite, highly engaged, highly influential, highly funded people will have far more influence than popular opinion. Perhaps aid to Ukraine might be one of those rare examples where popular opinion outweighs elite tendencies.
There's the group that are sort of natural isolationists represents a much larger share of the country. And I think what's happening in the border debate is not that people are, have this sort of very literal-minded view of the federal budget where it's like we're taking $5 from the border and spending $5 in Ukraine. Instead, it's more of a sense of if we can't trust our leadership to, take care of our own borders, why would we trust them when they go and make policy about Ukraine, a subject about which, people don't care that much. I think it's more about sort of the trust that is given to elites than spending in dollars and cents per se.
Although there is a strain of the Republican Party that is actually making that. I mean, Senator J.D. Vance is making that exact argument, which is that they want to spend that money overseas instead of here at home. It's a great political tool.
Right, but I just think the money is not the real issue. I agree there that's the rhetoric, but it's not about money. It's about trust in elites.
Money is a very convenient unit of measurement, right? Of like what matters to you, right? Like it's
yes, it is.
So my wife tells me.
It's overwhelmingly the unit of measurement for everything.
But it's like a budget is a moral document, right? Like show me what you spend money on, and I'll show you what you care about. I mean, I do think it is striking though that there have been, and maybe this is just recency bias speaking, but like there have been moments in American history where collecting a coalition that believes in an idea of America as a kind of, to quote a phrase, city on the hill, like a beacon of freedom. That I think is an appeal that has been meaningful to Americans in pretty large numbers. It might not be the main motivating reason, but I do think that Americans want to think of America as being a strong, virtuous country. I mean, if not, why would we be having these huge debates about, American history and how we talk about America's slavery and colonialism and all these kinds of things if we didn't care about the, sort of the fundamentally virtuous way in which America is perceived in the world?
There's this peculiar thing where Americans can be up for a kind of isolationism, but it is a kind of city on the hill isolationism. It's like the world is bad and corrupt and we don't want to mess with it and we don't want it to mess with us and we're just going to do our own thing. I think what Americans don't like is a kind of realpolitik, sort of amoral grand strategy. If Americans are going to be in the world, we want to believe that we're fighting for democracy. Otherwise, we're just going to sort of pull back and do our own thing. Whereas a figure like Henry Kissinger, even though American elites all sort of, liked him and feted him till the end, is, I think, deeply out of step with the national character. Americans don't want to hear arguments about, like, the balance of power and things like that.
They don't want to be the world's policeman. I mean, this is what Trump hits on. It's like, we don't need to be doing this. NATO needs to step up. Europe needs to step up. Well, this should not be our responsibility.
Right. If you can offload this stuff to other people or recognize that it's other people's problem much more than it's yours, right, that's obviously in your people's best interest. It's obviously in your nation's best interest.
Since this collapsing of the foreign and the domestic that we've talked about on some of these issues is part of the appeal, I think, of Trumpism, and that he's pushing back against it with this sort of nationalist populism. Like, what does he keep on saying? If you don't have a border, you don't have a country anymore. That erosion of what we think of as foreign and domestic, between us and them, between there and here, that's part of what Trumpism is responding to, and that's part of what he says in blunt and sometimes crude ways in his campaign.
Yeah,
but at the same time, and I agree with that, but there is also a kind of globalization of nationalist anxiety.
Yes.
Like,
irony.
Donald Trump succeeds in 2015 and 2016 in part because of things like the Syrian migrant crisis in Europe and some of the Islamic State's terrorist attacks in Europe. Now, obviously, there were some terrorist attacks.
So what's going to determine who will be elected president in 2024? Events, my dear boy, events. What would determine whether or not the next president of the United States is successful? Events, my dear boy, events. What will determine if I have a good week? In large part, it will be events. There are certain events that I navigate gracefully and successfully. And there are other types of events that I tend to navigate in a self-destructive, antisocial, embarrassing, awkward fashion. And so too in politics, all right? If current trends continue, Donald Trump will be elected the next president of the United States, without respect to his, lack of obvious leadership abilities.
In the U.S. too. But I think the shadow of Europe's challenge with migration and Europe's challenge with radical Islam totally hung over U.S. politics, and especially conservative politics, at the time when Trump was coming on the scene. And I think that dynamic has sort of obviously continued in various ways, that you have a globalization of...
Yeah, Trump obviously has strong isolationist tendencies, which have always held considerable support in the United States. What was George Washington's, famous final address? Beware of foreign policy entanglements.
Culture wars over nationalism. That's fascinating to watch.
Right. And I think, like, in some ways, the sort of early indicator was Brexit, right? I mean, I remember seeing those results coming in and just, thinking, my God, this thing that never seemed possible was possible. And I don't know that it's particularly worked out very well, but here we are. Okay. In 15 seconds or less, each of you, does foreign policy as an issue favor Trump or Biden in this election?
I'm going with Trump. People are feeling surly about life and the world in general, and that tends to come back and bite the president on the butt.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the whole foreign policy favors the incumbent. It does not work this time around when people see sort of a chaotic world under Biden and a quote unquote strong leader under Donald Trump.
Ross?
I feel like I should be contrarian, but I agree. Certainly, I think right now, if the election were held right now, the foreign policy landscape and the situation in the world would be.
Right. So right now, it's pretty obvious that the direction of events is in Donald Trump's favor, and we've got growing far right, left, center, whatever you call the populist wave in Europe, right, is going to reduce the chances of substantial funding for Ukraine.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the consequences of that presumably affect the balance of power in the European Parliament, and that in turn will affect who gets the big jobs in the European Commission.
Could well do. I think the smart money is probably still on Ursula von der Leyen coming back for a second term as Commission President, but that's not a sure thing. We've already seen Charles Michel, the current President of the Council, who wanted to stand for the European Parliament.
Yes, United States, George Floyd or George Washington? Which way, man? Withdraw
from that. That's more related to the risks around Viktor Orban having the rotating presidency of the EU in the second half of the year. But it's, it'll be complex on top jobs. I think the bigger issue for me, and I think for all of your listeners and everybody else, is really what might it mean for Ukraine? Above all, of course, the appetite in the EU to supply arms and to ensure that Ukraine can come out ahead in this war. The risk, obviously, with some of the right-wing populists, and that's a risk across the Atlantic as well as here, is their desire to come to terms with Putin on terms that might be much more appealing to Putin than he would currently get. So that's a big risk. Then beyond the war,
and that really has nothing to do with any particular affection for Vladimir Putin. It's much more a realistic determination of what's in your own nation's best interests, right? So during World War II, we sided with Joseph Stalin against the Nazis, not because, generally speaking, we had great affection for Uncle Joe, right? In a war to the death with the Nazis, then under those circumstances, we made common cause with the devil. Okay, I just read decent book, good book by a lefty, Avian Leidig, sociologist, and she's written this book, The Women of the Far Right, Social Media Influences and Online Radicalization.
How they use these influencer practices as an effective radicalization strategy. So a lot of the far-right women that I detail in the book, they are particularly adept at showcasing certain qualities of seeming to be relatable, accessible, and authentic to their followers and to mainstream audiences. And I show how this is a strategy that presents an opportunity for far-right actors to deliver propaganda on social media for a legitimizing effect of their political ideology. And I think this is something that is quite different from their male counterparts. For example, because their male counterparts tend to be a lot more escalatory in their rhetoric, a lot more violent in their rhetoric, and hence that's why we often see them get banned from platforms quite often. But for these women within the far right, they're very good at traversing that boundary between what is considered to be acceptable speech on these platforms, and that's often because they will cloak it in this acceptable discourse for their followers.
So I've got a special guest here, Curious Gazelle. So welcome to the show, Curious. What's going on? Okay, you'll have to unmute yourself. Well, when you're ready to unmute yourself, just jump on in.
So what motivates these women? Have you looked at all into why paradoxically, or is it paradoxically that they behave, that they do this?
I think it can break down into so many different reasons, and of course it depends on the individual.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. What's going on?
Yeah, nothing much. I just wanted to jump on your stream for a bit. I feel very curious today, but I don't know what exactly I'm curious about.
Well, one thing, let's pick up on the conversation we were having over Twitter. What's an appropriate use of satire? And I just read a terrific book on satire and humor, and it made the point that humor is generally an inefficient form of communication because humor always occurs in the form of a riddle, right? It's a form of play. It is the collision of an one paradigm with another unexpected paradigm, and that's what makes us laugh. So because it's an inefficient form of communication, it's not something you generally want to use with your superiors, your bosses. And it's not something to use with people who don't want to play with you. Right? If someone doesn't want to play with you, then using humor, irony, sarcasm, satire is going to rub them the wrong way. So you need a fellow playmate if you're going to have useful humor interactions. Any thoughts on that?
No, I definitely agree with you that, it takes two to tango. So you need somebody to give that sort of satire back to you, or understand where you're coming from. And sometimes you don't really want a satirical response. You want somebody to truthfully answer whatever your query or whatever your question may be. So it can get a bit annoying, especially when you look at the right wing sphere, and just if you just look at political Twitter in general. I feel that people are steeped in satire, and you can get addicted to that. So
Yeah, yeah. Did you want
and
to
you,
continue? Go, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. So you can get addicted to that, and what that means is you never can see reality for what it is,
Right, and
which is
it's
dangerous.
yeah, and it's also I know I often use humor and satire and irony as a way of keeping other people at arm's length, right? Not allowing them in. So if you're trying to have an intimate conversation with someone and they keep using irony and sarcasm is not conducive usually to intimacy unless that person's in a particularly playful mood.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So what is this stream today about?
Ah, good. Well, just before it started, there was a news story about 3 U.S. servicemen in Jordan who'd been killed in a drone strike, and I kind of switched focus. But then I was going to talk about a book I just read, Women of the Far Right. But then there was another book I just read, which kind of formed the basis for our Twitter discussion, and it's called Irony and Outrage: The Polarized Landscape of Rage, Fear, and Laughter in the United States. And I really appreciated how this book, broke down what is humor, right? It's a
Hmm.
juxtaposition, right? Something is not funny without a juxtaposition. And then there's a definition here of satire, right? It has 4
Hmm.
characteristics: aggression, play, laughter, and judgment. So satire embodies the spirit of attack. So play refers to humor operates like a riddle that must be solved, usually using allusions to silly or strange constructs. And then laughter captures the mirth that is anticipated by and derived from a satirical message. And then judgment is the notion that satire presents an evaluative argument aimed at a target, such as an institution, a policy, a practice, or society as a whole. And so I tend to treat everything as a great big joke. And that is not usually a good way of interacting with people. Like it's been really hard for me to curb that. So people get exhausted, right? People that I'm around on a daily basis, they get exhausted because they feel me pushing for laughter. And so when someone's expecting you to laugh, someone's trying to manipulate you into laughter, and you're not feeling like playing and you're not feeling like laughter, it's tiring. And I often tire people out because I'm constantly trying to manipulate them into laughter. And so I was thinking about this humor addiction that I have, this satirical, ironic sarcasm addiction that I have, which in large part is based on keeping people at bay, and another part is about trying to manipulate more attention for me, and it wears people down. Some people more than others. So some people miss it when I stop engaging in it, and they get, I miss when you're just always being sarcastic. But one always has to read one's audience. And so humor is entirely audience dependent. So if I were to make a joke about the intricacies of Orthodox Judaism, right, that likely would not be something that would amuse you because you're probably not particularly up to date on the intricacies of Orthodox Judaism. So humor, like almost everything else, is entirely situation dependent. Anything that I touched on there that you want to comment on?
I'm sorry, just give me a second. I'm just
Yep.
having, I
Go
just need
ahead.
to sort of get
Yep.
myself sorted a bit
Yep.
because I
Yep.
just
Yep.
turned on my laptop.
Yep. 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 Get yourself
I'm
sorted,
using
and then
this stream on my
yeah.
phone.
Yeah.
Just give me,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
one
Take as
one
much time
minute
as you
and
want.
I will,
Yeah.
yeah.
Take as much time as you want, and we'll
Okay,
come right
I'm
back.
really sorry about that. Yeah.
No,
So when
no
I was doing
problem.
this research, I looked into the stories that these women would share about their radicalization journeys. And I do believe that for many of them, if not most of them, it was very genuine convictions that they had in terms of the ideological beliefs of the far right. But I also started to see them gain a lot more celebrity and attention, particularly within a movement which continuously is dominated by men, but often needs women to sort of showcase that this is a more legitimate space, or at least provide that perception of a more legitimate space. And so, at least with the influencers I studied, I think they are opportunists, and then they very much do see that there is a platform for them in this space. And they often.
So it's funny to use the put down of opportunist, because to successfully navigate life, you have to be opportunistic. So I guess it's the degree of opportunism that you engage in that will make you labeled an opportunist or not. So, for example, when it comes to gossip, you don't want to, generally speaking, it's not in your best interest to develop the reputation as a gossip. And yet, to navigate life, you have to engage in gossip. You have to know what's going on. But you don't want to be known as the primary source of gossip at work. And you don't want to, generally speaking, it's not in your best interest in the workplace to be known as a party to or good friends with, or someone who hangs out with someone who is the primary source of gossip at work, because that will contaminate your reputation. And the best way to stay employed is to be entirely aligned with or to be outwardly aligned with your employer's vision. And few employers are going to glory and advance and celebrate gossips. And so too with opportunism. It's just such a funny label to put on someone when, as you're navigating through life, obviously you want to be highly opportunistic. But if you're constantly sacrificing what you stand up for, I guess in terms of your own best interest, then you develop the label opportunistic. So I guess it's the amount, intensity that you engage in opportunism that will determine whether or not you get that label. So thinking about Daniel Patrick Moynihan and people with a political temperament, all right, they will completely change their politics depending upon their situation, right? Not just the broader situation for their constituents, but depending on where they are in power in relation to an issue like proliferation of drugs. And so if you just constantly hop skipping between various positions, right, you in political terms become noted as an opportunist. Okay, Curious, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. So as you were saying, you what were you talking about? You talking about like the four sort of types of satire.
No, the
Um,
four components of satire. So let
oh, the
me,
four components of
yeah,
satire,
let me
right?
just review them. There's aggression. So there's
Uh-huh.
usually a victim. There's play. So it's humor that operates like a riddle that must be solved. Then there's laughter, which is the pleasure anticipated by and derived from the satire. And then there's a judgment, because satire usually has a target, such as an institution or a policy or a practice or society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on
So
satire?
would you say that, satire is most often just a defense mechanism that helps you evade truth
No, it
or the
can.
truth of that situation?
Uh,
And
uh,
so what about you in particular? Because I'm really interested in you as a sort of character. Um, so would you say that you use satire when you sort of want to evade a situation, or is it just something that is kind of knee jerk? Or
it's
it
knee
could be
jerk.
both.
It's knee jerk, but also let's just take our interactions. Right, I never want to have an interaction with you, particularly that's written down, that I would feel embarrassed about if it was, shared. All right.
Right.
So that has some strong incentives to keep a very tight handle on how much I share with you, because I've never met you in person, and I know that I can be very intoxicated by the attentions of pretty, intelligent young women such as yourself. I'm very liable to make a fool of myself. I don't want to make a fool of myself, and so I limit how intimate I become in my conversations with you to minimize the chances that you or someone who gets access to your account chooses to publicly humiliate me.
So do you think that I try to publicly humiliate you? Is that
No,
what you're
no, no,
saying?
no, no. But you just never know what happens. Human people are unpredictable, right? We can never fully know either ourselves or anyone else. And so nobody gets married anticipating divorce, and yet approximately half of marriages end in divorce, and they often end in a really nasty, brutal, bitter way. And so I think anyone interacting with someone online should, generally speaking, not share anything written down that can be used to humiliate them, right? You're giving someone a sword when you do that, and generally speaking, that's not in your best interest.
I mean, I know I sent you a tweet about how you should explore the topic of the use and abuses of satire, but the reason I wanted to jump on this stream today is I was actually fascinated by you as a character, because it's like you just stream every day, and how do you do it? How do you come up with these topics? I mean, is it all ad hoc? Like, do you just think of it on the spot? Or is there a lot of preparation that goes into this?
So it takes a lot of energy to do this. And also it takes a lot of desire to do this, because the incentives, generally speaking, for somebody to live stream, for a sensible person to live stream, are usually strongly aligned against live streaming, because there are just so many opportunities that you can permanently or significantly damage your life. Those chances are far greater than you doing something positive for your life. So I usually have to be seized. I have to be almost taken over. I guess you can conceive of this in spiritual terms, emotional terms, ideological and cognitive and intellectual terms. I have to be seized by a topic that compels me to supersede my best interests and to supersede my natural laziness, right? My natural predisposition is to conserve energy. And to do a live stream, even a crappy live stream, takes a tremendous amount of energy. So I have to be taken over by questions, by a sense that I have something important to say, or a sense, sometimes it's my day is being humiliating and I want to do something that I'm going to feel competent at. So usually most of my days are not spent doing what I want to do. I have to conform my will to other people's will. But then sometimes in doing that, there's humiliation and loss, and I want to regain a sense of agency, a sense of mastery, or a sense of competence. So for me, like the greatest put down that someone can give me is to say that I'm not competent. So an attack on my competency is the most painful attack, just like telling a woman that she's not attractive will usually be
Can I
experienced
tell
as
you
the greatest put
something?
down.
Can I
Yes.
tell you something? Can I tell you something, Luke? You're not
Yes.
competent.
Oh, you wound me.
And regarding your use of humor, I think you're very appropriate with humor. You know when to use it and when not to use it. So I think you do yourself a disservice by sort of mischaracterizing yourself a little bit there. That you use humor all the time, or you're using humor as a defense mechanism, or blah blah blah. But I think you use it at the right time.
Well, I've gotten better because I've been humiliated. All right. My natural tendency is to do what I want to do. But if I experience enough humiliation doing what I want to do, then I stop it eventually, right? After enough pain, right? If the pain of doing what I want to do outweighs the pain of doing what I don't want to do, then I'm going to do what I don't want to do. So I've suffered enough humiliation from following my own natural tendencies that I've developed some more adaptive habits. And then there's a second factor that comes into play. I think generally speaking, if you're going to talk about yourself publicly, you should overwhelmingly focus on your failures and humiliations. You should not focus on the things that you're doing well. So I'm usually not going to speak publicly about the things that I do well.
But why?
I find it usually, I don't know, it seems to work better that way, because if I was to stand up here and talk about things that I do well, it seems to incentivize life to then humiliate me.
Well, you need to come to a compromised state where you learn how to humble brag. So you can talk about all of your successes and things that you're good at, but people don't even realize you're doing it.
No, that's manipulation. That's not a good way to go through life. So there is one good reason to talk about your successes when you think that it can be genuinely helpful. So if I have a genuine desire to be of assistance to others, then that's an appropriate time for me to talk about successes.
Wait, don't you think talking about your failures all the time is also a form of manipulation, because you are guarding yourself from people getting jealous, or people sort of trying to take you down because they think you're being, you're showing off far too much?
Yes, it is. It's also a form of manipulation, but it seems to be a form of manipulation with less of a downside.
Okay, but if we could just go back to the previous topic, which was how do you prep for these streams? So if we use this stream in particular as an example, I mean, you've given it the title, The Women of the Far Right. So do you think of these titles the day before? Do they come to you in the moment and then you're like, yeah, now I need to stream? Like, what is if you can kind of hyper focus on this stream to talk about how you stream generally and how you prep for them, then I would appreciate
Yeah,
that.
so I was sick last week, and while I was sick, and just before I was sick, I read a couple of books. So one was a book called The Women of the Far Right, which reminded me of those Playboy editions, like the Women of Starbucks, or the Women of a particular athletic conference in the United States, or the Women of the Post Office. And then they'd have, various women from these various occupations, disrobing in Playboy. So I thought I'd take the first half of this academic book, The Women of the Far Right, then add a leering subtitle. That just gave me some energy. All right, it takes a lot of energy to do a stream, so I sometimes adopt personas or titles or topics or questions for streams that are going to give me energy. So I wanted to explore this book that I just read, the Women of the Far Right, and explore the topic of opportunism. All right, so this academic who's a left-wing sociologist is looking at women of the far right and appropriately labeling them opportunists. And then that made me think, an adaptive approach to life is to be opportunist, but you don't want to get the reputation of being an opportunist. So, like, we all want to excel our friends, but if anyone detects that you want to excel your friends, you're going to have fewer friends. So I find it fascinating when we're strongly incentivized to behave in a way that if we were accurately labeled for engaging in something, it would be very much against our best interests. So we're incentivized to act in a way that we don't want to be accurately labeled for doing. Like, what's the difference between an opportunist and simply the wise and graceful person who opportunistically moves through life but does not get labeled an opportunist?
Mm-hmm. But then how do you sort of segue into, other topics on your stream? So like the title is The Women of the Far Right, and you're exploring the topic of opportunism through that. But then you also, like, you've been talking about Biden administration discussing slowing some weaponry deliveries to Israel. You're talking about black pastors pressuring Biden to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So how do those link to the topic, or would you call them?
Yeah. So I read
topics?
newspapers for 1 to 2 hours a day. And when there's an article that interests me. And so two of those articles, one from NBC News, which I haven't discussed yet, the Biden administration is thinking of slowing their delivery of weapons to Israel to protest Bibi Netanyahu's policy. So I just put that in show notes, right? I keep a file where anytime I read an interesting article, I put it in there. And then if I start going on a topic or something suddenly comes up, such as this attack in Jordan, I know that I've got several articles on a related theme that I can pivot to. So I was intending to make the main focus of this stream the women of the far right. But in my notes, I had about 3 separate articles that are related to this conflict in the Middle East, so that if for some reason I get pivoted in any particular direction, I've got all these articles lined up that I can then go on. So the show will change. Like someone in the chat will say something, a guest will say something, and suddenly I'm pivoted in a new direction that I did not intend to make the primary focus of the stream. And once I pivot, I've got a bunch of prep. I've done a bunch of prep and articles that I can then move to for a while.
Right. So do you like that spontaneity, or do you sometimes feel very dissatisfied with all of these pivots? And after you've done like a 3-4 hour stream, you think, oh, I didn't really explore the
title,
first topic, but the title of the topic. Yeah. Is that what you feel?
Mixed feelings. So it's not overwhelmingly one reaction or the other. So
which stream has made you feel the most dissatisfied?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, I can tell you exact type of stream where I have a topic and I have questions, and I get up here and suddenly I find I have nothing to add. The streams where I'm more of a taker than a giver, where I'm just playing other people's opinions, reading other people's analysis, and I suddenly find that I don't have anything to add. So usually streams where I haven't done sufficient preparation, where I haven't formed my own thoughts, and the cognitive load of operating a live stream often takes over. So I am much looser and more articulate before I press live stream. But once I start streaming, suddenly the cognitive load of monitoring my sound levels, monitoring the picture, monitoring that this is transmitting to 6 different outlets, or challenges in the chat, or just I have that increased technical cognitive load, which reduces the operating capacity of my brain to actually say something or to contribute to a stream. So when I don't feel like I've contributed anything of significance and I've simply parroted or played other people's analysis, that makes me frustrated.
Right. So do you think that there is more sort of cognitive load now that I've entered the stream as well? Because this is now a pivot from your initial topic.
No, because it's so much easier to talk to someone else. So I used to typically have 5 to 10 people as guests when I live streamed. And that was in the glory days of 2017, 2018. And then social media companies such as YouTube became much more restrictive on the things that you could talk about. So I once had a very naughty niche where I talk about what was going on with the alt-right, and there was an enormous audience for that topic, and I had an enormous number of contributors, and we had wonderful panel shows. Then 2 things happened. One was that YouTube in particular and social media companies in general became much more restrictive about the topics you could talk about. 2, people talking about these things went out and committed mass murder, which then made it much more difficult to talk about these topics. And then 3, I hooked up with a very articulate, intelligent co-host, Kevin Michael Grace, but he was not necessarily well suited to the panel show. And so I so wanted Kevin on the show. It came, though, at the cost of the panel discussions that we used to have. And then ways with Kevin, I wasn't able to regain the panel element of the show. So it is far easier for me it is 10 times easier for me to live stream with you than it is for me to live stream on my own.
Okay, well, I'm glad that I could ease the burden a little bit.
Thank you. It's
But
really
I still,
tough to talk on your own.
I still, well, I still sort of feel bad that I may be distracting you from the original topic. So we could go back to the original topic, which
No,
is
don't feel bad.
women and the far right. Well, okay, well, because Claire Khaw, who tweets at book_of_rules, Claire Khaw, the founder of a ideology called secular Quranism, she's asked me to ask you, can you please name the women of the far right?
Well, none of them are important, particularly important in and of themselves. So that's probably the most important thing to say, is that none of them are particularly
No, the
important.
most important thing to do is to name some names.
No, the most important thing
That's
to
what
do
that's
is to provide some context, and the context is none of them are important. Like if Claire Khaw stopped publicly commenting on social media, like our discourse would not be diminished, right?
What do you think of Claire Khaw?
An eccentric personality. The most important thing is that I don't think about her very much. I'm happy to intermittently have her on my show, but she's not somebody I think about, and her ideology is not one that I find thought-provoking.
Do you find it quite difficult to talk to her or easy to talk to her? Do you think that she distracts from the topic, or do you think,
I don't
how do
think
you
she.
find conversing with her?
If it's like twice a year, it's fine. If it's considerably more than that, I just don't feel like she adds much.
Okay, well, I have a few theories about Claire Khaw, but I don't know if I can use
Go ahead.
this as an opportunity to talk
No,
about
feel
them.
free. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of feel that she is sort of she has a brain that's steeped in satire. You know, she cannot think of anything in truthful terms anymore. Everything, and and even her satire now, she thinks that is the truth. She thinks this sort of worldview called secular Quranism is the truth. But I think she's moved into that because of her dissatisfaction with politics.
Yeah. So
So
yes, exactly. I think you're correct that
yeah,
real life has proved dissatisfying. So she has retreated to a fantasy world.
exactly. But she's not. I mean, I have sort of psychologized her. I've offered my psychologization to her in sort of Twitter spaces and live streams, but she's just been very resistant to accepting what I'm saying, because she'll just revert back to talking about secular Quranism.
Right. She's a
Um,
one-trick pony, and
mhm.
if she seems to have a fairly impoverished real life. She doesn't seem to have that many significant interactions with people in real life. And two, she doesn't read books or serious essays, it seems like. So she both has an impoverished cognitive life and an impoverished real life, which leaves
I
her as
don't.
a one-trick pony.
I mean, I disagree with you about her having a sort of impoverished personal life, because she has been married twice, and she has children, and she's done what women need to do in life. And now she's just kind of online, talking about things. And I mean, she was involved with the British National Party um, for I think a decade or something of her life, and I think that made her very jaded about politics. You can't really get anything done. It's just all talk. You can't really organize and implement things that you really want implementing. And as a result, she's just gone straight into, as you said, fantasy world.
Yeah, but I
And
think
she's
that's
fine living there.
I think that's much more the symptom than the cause, right? Healthy,
Right.
well-adjusted people don't get into which party was it?
The BNP, the British
Yeah,
National Party,
right.
which was headed
Healthy,
by Nick
well-adjusted
Griffin at the
people
time.
don't join the British National Party. Type of people who join the British Nationalist Party are marginalized losers. So far-right movements or far-left movements attract socially marginalized losers. And then, obviously, socially marginalized people are not well-equipped to get along well with others. So marginalized, disturbed people join these extremist movements with other marginalized, disturbed people, and then shockingly, they have unsatisfying interactions within those movements because these are fundamentally people who don't play nicely with others.
So you think that Claire is sort of mentally unwell?
Correct.
Because if she's had 2 husbands and she's had kids, I think she's all right.
Well, she's not 10 out of 10 in mental illness, but obviously someone who's like socially thriving or personally thriving or anyone who's got anything going on in their life is not going to join the British National Party because associating with that party will destroy any bonds you have to normal society. But because she didn't have many bonds to normal society, she was willing to risk what she had for the excitement that came with joining this dangerous party.
Yeah, well, Claire thinks very sort of highly of herself. She's asked the question, hasn't Trump become marginalized? So she sort of thinks she's on Trump's level here.
Yeah, she's completely protected against real world feedback because she lives in a fantasy world that cannot be penetrated. But this is a symptom. Why does someone retreat to such a fantasy world? Because they're failing in real life. Well, not just getting old. Plenty of people who are getting old have very satisfying relationships. Do you think Claire Khaw has great relations with her children and great relations with her relatives and great relations with her neighbors and great relations, with social clubs? And no, if she had any of that, she wouldn't be primarily living in a fantasy world. People switch to living in a fantasy world because they're failing in the real world.
Okay, but I think it's just a function of her getting older and older. Like I just, when I think about her, I don't think about her as some psychotic witch online, which is probably what other people think of her as. I just think, oh, like she's a cute little grandmother. Like I just think she's so adorable.
Right, and you'll think that until she, wounds you, and you will.
Has she wounded you?
Yeah, she's disturbed me. She once you form any sort of connection with you, she will inevitably become quite disturbing. So right now, she is an object of fun and enjoyment for you, but that's going to change any day now, and you will regret that you ever had any interaction with her.
Oh well, it's already changed because I no longer stream with her. I mean, it's been 2-3 months since I've streamed with her. I mean, I was in her space yesterday, but I was just sort of trolling her for about 5 seconds, and then I left the space. But yeah, we don't space or stream on a regular basis anymore because I've just run out of things to talk to her about, and also the way in which she approaches any topic. It is exactly the same each time, and it all circles back to secular Quranism. So I've just embraced. I mean, she's going to get really happy that I'm saying this, but I've embraced defeat with Claire Khaw because I know that there's no point in discussing anything with her.
Right. There's no. I mean, I find it fine a couple of times a year, but I have no desire to do it more than that. There's just no payoff there.
So are you feeling a payoff speaking to me right now, or is a payoff determined sort of
I really enjoy speaking to you. I've waited years for this moment.
Really?
Yes, I've wanted you on my stream for years.
Right, oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've wanted
and I've
you on my
I've been listening to you since you were streaming with Verity in 2015.
Yeah, you were there for my first live stream, and then we, I think, started interacting in 2020. So I have waited for this moment for probably 3.5 years.
Wow. I wish I was more prepared for this stream, actually. Like every single time I used to think, I want to go on Luke Ford's stream, and I used to think, oh, I'm going to prepare, I'm going to read the articles, and then we're going to have this grand stream about like loads of different topics and, you know, discuss each and every news article under the sun. But I've just jumped on without any, it's very sort of ad hoc.
Yeah, I mean, I have not even been able to have a private, phone or Zoom or Skype, or I've never had a private conversation with you. And I've wanted to do this with you for 3.5 years, woman.
Okay, well, I really well, I take that as a compliment. I appreciate that. And I'm a big fan of yours, by the way. I genuinely think that if there is, you are the best live streamer on the internet today. That's
Wow.
what I would say. And I'm not even saying this because I'm speaking to you right now, and I think you're deserving of a compliment or something. It's not just for the sake of giving you a compliment. I genuinely think you are the best live streamer today.
Let me ask you a tough question. Why do you think you experience that? Why do you think that? What is it about you that resonates with what I do?
Well, because you are a free speech maximalist. So even though you are constantly in search of certain principles to stop you from thinking so much, and I understand that you follow Judaism, and you've got some, you've got principles from that religion as well to kind of guide you and structure your thoughts, but you still are very inquisitive, curious about lots of different topics, and so yeah, whilst you still have principles, you are willing to go beyond those principles and still exercise free thought. I don't know if I explained that well enough, but sorry, go ahead.
What about the dangerous out beyond the cognitive, the Overton window, out where the buses don't run no more element of my live stream? Do you find that danger scary, enticing?
No, I mean, you offer a meta-analysis, which is why I like you. So most people are obsessed with these Overton windows. They're just kind of they're just opining things online, like they're giving their opinion of what they think the world should look like, or whatever, XYZ event they're discussing. Whereas you don't actually give your full opinion, or you don't form an opinion until you've seen the other side as well. So, and you're constantly engaged in this sort of back and forth in your own mind as well. So it's not just, oh, I'm gonna come on this stream today and we're gonna talk about Trump, and we're gonna talk about how Trump has been this marginalized guy. No, I'm gonna look at the other side as well, and I'm gonna do a meta-analysis, and then I'm gonna come to a judgment, or maybe I won't come to a judgment, because it may be impossible to come to a judgment in a certain situation.
So I have a lot of live streams that I consider failures. They just don't work. So forget my feelings. What I think you just shared what brings you into one of my live streams. So to the extent that you'll pay attention, or you'll feel compelled by a live stream, I appreciate the compliments that you just gave. Talk to me about what takes you out of a live stream, because I know that many of my shows are failures. So just to the extent that you feel comfortable, let me know what bores you or you find distasteful, or you realize that you're just checking out of this live stream.
No, I always check out of live streams. I never watch a live stream from start to finish. I mean, I'm a big fan of Andrew Tate. I really enjoy his content, but even with his sort of live streams, which he calls emergency meetings, I'm not listening, from start to finish. But like, if I were to sort of come up with a reading list for myself, like a to-do list of live streams, instead of like picking out different live streams from different people, and like if someone said, you need to come up with a list of 100 live streams that you want to listen to over this month or over the course of maybe even a year or something. Okay, so you commit to that. So I would not pick out different live streams from different people. I just want to do a deep dive into all of your live streams or all of Andrew Tate's live streams, because I get more from that than just different people approaching the same topic or something. I much prefer. I get hyper focused on one person because I think a single individual has a lot to offer.
And let's just take Andrew Tate. So what do his live streams do for you? Like, what engages you? What brings you in? What keeps you listening to an Andrew Tate live stream?
Well, he's a very deep thinker, and people don't realize that about him. Again, I'm always inclined towards people who can think quite meta. So look, even though you, Luke Ford, have a religion, and even though Andrew Tate now he's converted to Islam, so he is a religion, and even previously had a sort of worldview his own, but he can still, and you can still come out of that and approach things in a kind of meta way. So again, we're talking about meta-analysis. My inclination is always towards meta-analysis because I find it really difficult to kind of understand any situation without looking at the underlying principles that determine it in the first place.
What would you
I
like?
can't just autistically. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to be self-centered and ask, what do you think I could do with this show, or what could I do more of, or where could I go that might be compelling?
Okay, well, first of all, you need to get rid of that Rob dude. Sorry, not Rob. What's his name? The rabbi that you have.
Reb Duvid.
Oh, Reb Duvid, yeah. He is so boring. Oh my God. I don't know what, I mean, I understand. I mean, I completely get that people want to talk to different people, and interactions with people who disagree with you or think differently to you can make for a very interesting conversation, but I just don't.
Yeah, you tune out when Duvid. Yeah, it's not a pleasurable, cognitively enhancing experience. Yeah. I
mean, I'm still, me personally, I'm still fascinated by what you get out of talking to Duvid. So I would, if I actually committed to this task of listening to all of your live streams from start to finish, I would not be skipping through Duvid's bits, because I want to see how you interact with him and what you get from that. So however, the average listener, I don't think they're gonna be like, oh yeah, like let me listen to Luke Ford because Duvid's on. Like that just is not gonna happen.
What is
he
it
does
about
tend to go on a lot?
Yeah, what is it about Duvid that you find boring or the opposite of compelling? Can you break it down and be as specific as possible?
I think, well, it's very ironic because you are the more sort of liberal Jew compared to Duvid, if I'm right.
Yes.
And yet he is the more elastic thinker. He just gets lost in what the principle is, right? So whereas you have your principles, and then sometimes you can discard your principle for a second and analyze a topic outside of that principle. But generally speaking, you know when to stop and say, well, you know how to sort of guide the conversation, right?
So I'll stop him
Whereas
repeating himself. Like his natural tendency is to
exactly,
repeat a point again and again and again. And once he repeats
exactly.
himself 2 or 3 times, usually I'll intervene.
Well, that I think that repetition is a function of him just not having any true belief in his head. That's what I feel. I know that's I don't
And
know, maybe you do this
growing
things get
towards
really
the sunlight
offended.
of attention, because I notice this with many live streamers, they say things that will get attention or
Mm,
applause.
right. Yeah. So again, that's quite ironic because you were the liberal Jew in comparison to him, but he is the one that is more he's more susceptible to worldly desires.
Yeah, it's very hard to do a regular live stream and not become captured by your audience. Do you discern me, or have you discerned me experiencing audience capture?
No, because I think the whole point with you live streaming is to escape audience capture. You're constantly avoiding and escaping the mob,
Yeah.
which is why you turn to Judaism. Or it's like people say Judaism is a very tribal religion, but in your context, you've escaped your own tribe. You've escaped tribalism and Judaism frees you from that tribe. Judaism frees you from your own tribalism, I feel.
I can do some good live streams on my own, but I'm only 20% of what I could be when I'm live streaming without you.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was I'm kind of I think you're more animated without me.
Yeah, maybe because perhaps I'm somewhat controlled right now because I don't want to make a total ass of myself.
Also, I know you've wanted to live stream with me for a while, but we did do a Twitter space,
I know,
and you
and
uploaded that
I
Twitter
had a
space.
fantasy that that would become a regular thing.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, I have been wanting to start streaming, you know. I've been and actually we've got Dickson in the stream right now as well. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, he's
Um,
welcome to contribute if he wants.
so he's a sort of online friend, and um, I've asked Dixon a couple of times as well that, you know, can we just live stream together? Because he also is a very kind of holistic and meta thinker, and I'm sorry, I'm going to carry on repeating this buzzword meta because I am really inclined towards meta-analysis, which is why I come to your streams, which is why I'm a big fan of your streams, which is why I'm a fan of Andrew Tate, which is why I get along with Dixon, and which is why I had to stop streaming with Claire because she just can't get out of a sort of autistic fixation.
Can you describe what a good live stream does for you emotionally? You've given voice to what it does for you cognitively. Can
Mm.
you give voice to what it does for you emotionally? It must
I don't know.
fulfill something. It must provide some sort of pleasure for you.
Well, is that working on the assumption that I'm watching a live stream from start to finish? Because
No, no, no,
I've
no.
said
Even
that
if you just
I don't do
watch or
that. Yeah,
listen for 2
yeah.
minutes, it's doing
Mm.
something for you. It's giving, like when I read a book, it's providing me cognitive sustenance, but it's also giving me something emotionally. So I think I can articulate what a good book does for me emotionally, but what does a good live stream do for you emotionally? Because you laid out what it does for you cognitively, but what does it do for you emotionally?
It it provides my mind with clarity. So even there are a lot of times where I'll I'll start listening to your live stream, but then I'll stop on my own, and so that stop will be very intentional. Like I've reached clarity now, and that's why I've stopped.
So here's using language from somebody else, but it feels like you are looking for someone to lay a tapestry of meaning over the world.
But I'm also just looking for somebody who's honest and can conduct objective analysis, because I think that's really lacking in the world. I mean, we could work through a sort of comparative framework to approach this question of yours. I mean, can you give me the name of that that politics live streamer from Europe? You sometimes listen to him, and you sometimes sort of incorporate him into your live streams.
Can you give me more detail? I'm not sure which person. Oh, Colin Liddell. Colin Liddell from Japan.
No, I mean, what is it? By Japan, you mean someone who's Japanese?
No. Colin Liddell is a Scotsman who lives in Japan. But who's the person
No, he's
you're
not.
referring
He's not
to?
Scottish. He's
Okay.
European. He's a politics live streamer, and he's talking about the refugee crisis, immigration, and EU and things like that, and he also discusses American politics a lot. Actually, Trump.
How often do I
etc.
play him?
You do play him quite a bit.
Well, when the name comes to you, or some more identifying details.
No, I've never known his name.
It's funny, you don't like talking about what live streams do for you emotionally.
No, I was going to talk about it via him.
Right,
Okay,
but you
well,
want to come back to the cognitive. You don't want to go to the emotional.
Yeah, I don't know if I get any emotions from it. It's the cognitive is very important for my emotions, I guess.
Or you feel more comfortable and less exposed talking about the cognitive rather than the emotional, which is just too vulnerable.
No, I've spoken about the emotional quite a bit, like discussed things with Claire publicly in live streams and in relation to my private life. So, but even, I mean, I don't know, I still need to know what the name of that guy is. That's really bugging me.
I'm still
He's got
curious
short hair.
I'm still curious what like a good live stream does for you emotionally. Because it has to be doing something significant for you emotionally, because you resonate.
I can tell you what. I can tell you what a bad live stream does for me emotionally.
Yeah,
Like this
because
guy
that's less
who
vulnerable.
talks about European. That guy who talks about European politics, the European dude. I mean, I don't know. Maybe somebody in the comments is somebody saying Sam Vaknin. No, not Sam Vaknin.
Decoding the
How many people are
Gurus. Oh,
listening
Chris
right now?
Kavanagh. Chris Kavanagh, the Irishman, who's a cognitive anthropologist who co-hosts.
No.
Okay.
No, because I would have referred to him as an academic, and I know that he's a sort of Oxford professor or whatever. So Chris Kavanagh, he's got a European accent. So he's like,
Okay.
"Oh, I'm talking about these things like Trump," and he sort of talks like this, and he's got a flag behind him, and he's in a very tiny room.
Yeah.
With his mic and all of those things out.
Who's other live streams? Benjamin, that tall guy who plays the piano, who's a comic. Benjamin, what's his full name?
Owen Benjamin.
Owen Benjamin.
Yeah, Owen Benjamin's. So I've listened to about 10 live streams. I mean, he's got 2,000 live streams, nearly 2,000. So and he's kind of numbered all of them. So I haven't listened to all of Owen Benjamin's, I don't know, 1,500 live streams or something, but I really like the way he thinks. Again, a very kind of meta thinker. I mean, I need to do a meta-analysis of Tate, Luke Ford, and Owen Benjamin.
Yes.
and Dickson, perhaps. Because that would be the ultimate meta thing to do, right? Meta-analyze the meta-analysts.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. And you also ought to analyze what emotions a good live stream brings up for you.
Okay, so let me just tell you the emotions that I get from bad live streams. So this guy, the European dude who talks about politics, we can't remember his name, but he really annoys me because all he's doing is presenting information, right? So he's not analyzing the information. He's just saying, so for example, you've you've been through a New York Times article about black pastors pressuring Biden to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So he won't really analyze that. He'll just present the information, and that's happened. And then, okay, fine, he might have an opinion that, oh, this shouldn't happen or this should happen, but that's about it. And then that frustrates me. And what that does for my emotions is I feel unhappy. I feel dissatisfied. And I don't agree that cognition and emotions are, separate entities. They are interconnected.
Right, but it seems to be more congenial for you to talk about the cognitive element of emotion rather than the emotional element of cognition.
Yeah, and I think you've just morphed into Claire now because you've got a fixation on this topic. Well, okay, fine. You can.
That's the greatest put down. That's the sharpest cut.
No, you can laugh as Claire for a bit if you want.
God, you really know how to hurt a guy. This is why I'm so afraid to be vulnerable with you.
No. Let me tell you, Luke, you're very competent. Okay, but you can offer your psychologization if you wish to. You're saying that you're saying that I'm trying to escape emotions by talking about cognitive things. Is that what?
Well, I was just curious. I mean, I've tried 15 different times, so it's pointless to keep banging on about what live streams do for you emotionally. But I'll just talk about what doing a live stream does for me emotionally, and it frequently restores my sense of self. So real life has sometimes been humiliating. Real life has sometimes been embarrassing. Real life has sometimes been tiresome. Real life has drained the energy out of me. Real life has lacked excitement. And by doing a live stream, I get to regain all those things. I get a sense of agency, a sense of mastery, a sense of excitement. I get a sense that I'm running the show, that I'm in charge, that I am taking action, that I'm being decisive. I'm not just following directions from other people. And I feel like I'm good at something. So the most painful thing for me is to feel like I'm incompetent. And some days I feel incompetent. And so to restore my sense of masculinity and competence, I do something that I think I do well, and then I feel like more of a man.
Can you do like 20 star jumps right now?
What is a star jump? I'll look it up. I'll Google it. Star jumps. Okay, exercise.
It's when you jump with your arms and your legs wide open.
Ooh, okay. Here we go. Woo! I got.
So I'm waiting for this to show up because there's a bit of lag.
I'm not gonna do it because it'll could have negative repercussions for people around me if I'm jumping up and down. But I did 3.
Okay, I'm just watching the live stream on my laptop. There's a bit of a lag, so you're doing it now for me. Oh, excellent! That I'm gonna get a screen recording of that one and put it up on my Twitter feed.
What do you
I really
think?
appreciate you doing that.
What do you think doing live streams does for me emotionally? Because maybe I'm fooling myself.
I think live streams help you continue with NoFap.
Yes.
So they help you live this sort of monastic lifestyle that you're trying to live.
Right. So that was a key part of my NoFap journey. It was about 30 days in, I started announcing it. And it's not, I don't encourage people to announce such things. It's not usually a good idea. You need to be highly selective about the people you confide in. But by telling some people that I was NoFap, my ego got involved to continue on the NoFap path. Because once I kind of enlisted other people in my recovery, then I didn't want to succumb to a moment of weakness.
Okay, but you could still be a hypocrite, right? You could still be pretending to your audience that you've committed to NoFap.
Yes,
But
I could, but if I have addictive tendencies, which I think is fairly clear that I do, I can't live a lie without suffering significantly for it. So addicts, once they start lying, it becomes part of a downward trend. For addicts like me, to lie is to die. That I don't mean lying in the sense of you save someone's feelings. I'm talking about lying where, for no good reason, you claim something for yourself that is not true. You're doing it to enhance your ego. So for people like me, to lie is to die.
Mm-hmm.
It sets me
Well,
in a
I mean,
destructive downward spiral.
right. Well, regarding your NoFap journey, could I just offer a more sort of cynical interpretation of this?
Please.
And it's Quranic. So chapter 57, verse 27 of the Quran, it talks about, it says that, but monasticism was something they invented. We did not ordain it for them, only to seek God's pleasure. And even so, so this is the key here. And even so, they did not observe it properly. So the way I interpret this verse is, they still have a sort of cheeky wank here and there. So that's why I don't believe you.
Interesting. But for me, I get a similar emotional boost from being NoFap to live streaming, in that they both give me a sense of agency. Like when I used to succumb to the practice of self-abuse, I was no longer master of my domain. All right. I start flogging myself like a monkey, and I start, creating all sorts of erotic scenarios in my head. And then it sometimes becomes like the most pleasurable and intense experience of my day. And then I go around during the day collecting potential scenarios to work out at night. And so it starts taking over my life, which for someone who's not an addict in this department will seem completely ridiculous.
Yeah, but that still doesn't address that just addresses the kind of reasons why you're doing it, but it doesn't address whether you're actually doing it properly.
Yeah, but if the reasons I am doing it are somewhat in the direction of truth, then if I were living a lie that in this department, it would be highly destructive to me. And whatever someone may see in my live streams, I think it's pretty clear that I'm not on a destructive path in life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm someone who's master of his domain. Right? I'm someone with a strong sense of agency. My life has been headed in a good direction for about as long as I've been live streaming. I have humiliations, I have setbacks, but I have very solidly, I'm moving in a good direction. I can stand up here and share things about my life. I can develop ideas. And if I were engaged in such self-promotional lies, that would show.
Okay, well, this is a very interesting it's a very interesting way to approach the question. Like I've never come across this before. So I mean, that's what people should do. Like when you ask them, do you wank? And then they're like, oh well, no, I don't, and that's because You can see it because I live stream, and you can see that I think about different topics, and I do all this thing on, all these things online, and so it's a very sort of long-winded answer.
Well, comparing myself to almost all other right-wing live streamers of which I'm aware, it's very clear to me that what almost everyone else who operates in this space is primarily engaged in is self-promotion. Right? It's not primarily about ideas. It's not primarily about values. It's primarily about self-promotion, and they are generally willing to twist themselves and adapt themselves to please their audience. Right? There's something very hollow and dishonorable about almost all right-wing live streaming of which I'm aware. And that is not what I intend to do.
What pulls you towards honesty?
It's what I have to do to stay emotionally sober. So I've never engaged with drugs and alcohol, but I have certain emotional addictions which will dramatically deteriorate the quality of my life, and I don't want to relapse into them. And so for me to live, I have to tell the truth. As soon as I start getting in self-promotional lies, I spiral downhill, and it becomes evident very quickly.
I mean, Autistic Merit has asked the question, when you ask them if they wank, how often have you found yourself asking anyone a question as that? No, yeah, I've asked this question a lot of times, actually, to a lot of people.
And how often do you think they tell you the truth?
I think a lot of people are quite honest about that stuff. I don't know about the women of the far right, though. I mean, we can analyze their wanking capabilities, I guess. I mean, they are kind of inclined towards intellectual masturbation, but I don't know what they do.
Would you agree with my estimation that the women of the far right have no intellectual significance?
I mean, who are the women of the far right? There's Lauren Southern.
Lauren Southern at one point, Brittany Venti.
Pettibone.
Yeah, Brittany Pettibone. I'll have to.
Do you know what I call
because
Brittany
we can't
Pettibone?
even think of them. It just shows the lack of significance that they have. So Lana Locktuff of Red Ice, Rebecca Hargraves, Robin Riley, Ayla Stewart, Lacey Lynn, Lauren Chen.
Okay, well, I think the bigger the cult or the group, the more chance there is for a woman to gain some kind of power and influence. Maybe I'm wrong with this principle, by the way, but assuming that's the case, then with the kind of far right, because it's such a small sphere, you're going to have women just kind of fizzle out. Because they're going to have men trying to sort of, they're kind of vying for influence against men. That's what I feel. It's not a cooperative sort of model. It's a dog eat dog's world in the far right.
Are there, who would you say the most important thinkers, female thinkers on the far right?
I mean,
Because it's
what
impossible
even is
to
the
even
far
think of
right?
any.
Because no, the problem is because the far right is so disorganized and it's so splintered. You've got loads of different groups. So it's impossible for anybody to even talk about the women of the far right because it just doesn't work like that. There is no such thing as far right in a kind of, I mean, it's as a label to attack people. Yeah, that far right is I guess that's what far right means in that situation. But as for far right being an actual thing, I don't think it is.
Okay, what do you think of my analysis that almost all right-wing live streamers of which I'm aware are primarily engaged in an act of self-promotion?
Sorry, if you could just repeat that. I was just having a look
Yes.
at the comments
What do you think
section.
of my analysis that almost all right-wing live streamers of which I'm aware, so from
Mhm.
Millennial Woes to Sargon of Akkad to Richard Spencer to I don't know, they Tucker Carlson, they all seem to be primarily engaged in an act of self-promotion. Beyond ideas,
Well,
beyond
I think
ideology,
it's
beyond politics, it's primarily about them trying to become as famous, influential, and sleep with as many people, and just indulge their rawest drives.
No, I think it's a case by case thing. I know it's easy to think of that as the kind of unifying ultimate principle, but it's a case by case thing because look, if you look at millennial woes, I think that people can start off quite honest and then become dishonest as their audience grows. So things can start off quite genuine. With millennial woes, I think he's had a kind of up and down journey. So he started off honest, then kind of became dishonest in the middle, and now maybe he's back to being honest by, instead of making lots of content with Sagan and all these people, he's now making content with Richard Spencer, who's kind of a more of a kind of blacklisted figure on the far right, if you want to call it that. So that's a sort of sign of honesty. If you're willing to talk to people who have been cancelled by your own tribe, so to speak. And then who else did you mention? You mentioned Richard Spencer. I'd say that Richard Spencer has also had an up and down trajectory when it comes to honesty and dishonesty.
Is there anything that Richard believes in greater than Richard Spencer?
Yeah, I think he believes in humanity. No, I'm being serious. I get strong sort of humanist vibes off him.
Yeah, I know. That's why I find it funny, because you do believe that he does believe in something greater than himself.
Yeah, because each time he gets narcissistic or each time he's going overboard in his analysis of Jewish influence or the problems with immigration, etc., he will then kind of he'll just feel bad. I see it in his face, I see it in his gestures, I see it in the way that he speaks about things, and he tries to tell, each time he will kind of tell his audience to I don't know how to explain this, but he just comes across as a kind of humanist to me.
Do you think he's master of his domain?
Well, what is his domain?
Do you think he's in control of himself? Do you think he has an adaptive level of self-control, or do you think? I think he's in just varying degrees, varying circles of self-destruction.
No, I think that self-destruction has come later on. I think he used to be a master of his domain, but he didn't have a good relationship with his wife or whatever. That's what's happened. That's the reality.
So you would attribute much of his behavior to his bad relationship with his wife. Well, I would attribute his trouble with his wife to this is someone who is still in the grip of narcissism to a destructive degree. There's adaptive and maladaptive narcissism.
I don't know if this is narcissism now, because it's more like he has a bit of a messiah complex now, which is a form of narcissism, but also messiah complex can make you tell people to do moral things, right? So he's trying to control his audience now from becoming extremists. That's what I feel.
If he could get, say, 10 times the audience, 10 times the power, 10 times the money by saying the opposite of what he's saying right now, do you think he'd do it? I think he'd do it. I think Richard
No, because
will twist
he's had a chance to do that
with what's opportunist. Go ahead.
No, he's had a chance to do that, but
And
then
he's done it. He's done it repeatedly.
How? I mean, I haven't followed him that religiously, so you're probably more knowledgeable on this topic.
Well, I mean, this was a person for years for whom about his greatest joy was having, hundreds of high school dropouts flip him Heil Hitler salutes.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking of that. But he regrets that now, right? So he's apologized.
Yeah, because it's not in his interest anymore. He's discovered that it's more in his interest to be opposed to that, so he's changed. He twists with the incentives, because at his core he's currently empty. I don't think this is irreversible. I think he could get his life together and lead an honorable life, but for now he twists and turns in the winds of whatever is opportunistic for him.
Okay, I'm not. I don't know if I agree with you on that, because I think he deeply regretted.
Yeah, he regrets getting caught.
Charlottesville stuff.
Well, let's approach this from a different perspective. Are there any right-wing live streamers who you believe have resisted audience capture?
Andrew Tate, maybe, if you want to call him a right-wing streamer.
And so where does Andrew Tate go against the wishes of his audience?
Well, he had loads of sort of white right-wingers who were following him, but then he converts to Islam, which works against his audience. Maybe he has a bigger audience now because of that conversion. However, it was a sort of risky thing to do within the context of his initial audience. He means what he says when it comes to gender relations and his sort of views on women. He's not just taking the piss. Whereas, I don't know, a lot of right-wingers like a bit of just cock teasing going on all the time. It's like they know that the people who are sort of influencers in their sphere, they know that then they don't even mean what they say, and they're happy with that. They're happy with that dynamic. So I'm still thinking, like, where does Andrew Tate sort of what was the question? How did you phrase the question?
The question was, where does Andrew Tate tell his audience something that they don't want to hear? So, for example, anytime I say that people should get the COVID vaccine, my audience overwhelmingly reacts against that. When I tell my audience that by and large, our ruling elites did a better than average job with regard to COVID, almost nobody in my audience wants to hear that. When I say that sometimes the elites are right and the people are wrong, almost nobody in my audience wants to hear that. So I'm just continually saying things that my audience doesn't want to hear. And I'm curious what Andrew Tate is frequently saying that his audience does not want to hear.
Okay, well, so some of his Muslim audience don't want to hear things about how they don't want to hear anything about white identity, right? And Andrew Tate sort of panders to the white identity crowd. He recently tweeted, maybe today or yesterday or the day before, that it's completely logical for white people to want Britain to be white. remain a white majority. And now that he's got a huge Muslim and kind of POC, people of color, whatever, following, he's happy to say things that don't really suit their worldview.
Right, and does suit another substantial part of his audience. You used the word pander. He panders to one part of his audience, and then another time he panders to another part of his audience. But the guy is fundamentally a soulless panderer. I mean, that's what he is.
No, I think he's just an honest person, that he doesn't. Pandering is just a kind of post hoc analysis there, because we are interpreting it like that. I think in the moment when he's tweeting and saying things, I don't think he's really pandering to anybody. I think he genuinely believes what he does. He's always had a deep sort of critique of mob morality. That's a sort of, he won't explicitly say that, by the way, but I pick up on that. It's an implicit theme throughout his content. Like, why, even his criticism of celebrity culture. I mean, it's ironic because he's become a celebrity, but before he was big, and even now that he's big, he just kind of target celebrity culture, which is a very common thing to do, but nonetheless, it's still a criticism of mob morality. That's how I see it.
So we got Dickson in the hangout with us. Dickson, do you want to jump in on any particular topic?
I came into this a little bit late, so I don't know what exactly is being discussed here.
You've been on the hangout for an hour, so don't give me, I just came in late.
You've been
hanging around the hangout for an hour.
No, I left and I came back. So I was.
So you've spent about an hour on the hangout without saying anything. So it's not like you just jumped into the stream and haven't heard anything, which is what you presented. You've been listening for an hour.
No, are you autistic? I left. So this current strain of what you're talking about, I don't know, is what I'm saying. So what exactly you're saying right now, I'm not familiar with, other than I heard the word mob morality.
Good on you. That's good on you, mate, for accurately standing up for yourself. Is there anything that you've heard during the approximate hour that you've been on the hangout and very graciously?
The answer is no.
There's nothing you've heard that interests you. So if you didn't hear anything for an hour that interested you, what kind of moron are you to hang out for an hour listening to something that doesn't interest you?
No. Excuse me, this is your stream. So you spend an entire hour being boring and I get critiqued? Hell no, it's your fucking stream, mate. If you can't handle it, your fault, not mine. Fucking stop. How long have you been streaming for? Since I heard the word 2015 mentioned. So what? It's been about almost a decade and you still suck? How old are you? 55, 65? You look about 50. So 50 years old, no personality, boring as shit, continues to stream, yet you get mad at me. Okay.
I'm not mad at you. Tracks. I'm just curious.
Oh, no. You are arse mad. You are extremely mad. But now you're what? Retreating because I come back with a bit more verve, a bit more energy, because I'm a bit more testosterone than you? What are you? A pussy? Stand up for yourself now, quick. It's your stream. Go on.
I didn't need to take directions from you.
You're stuttering. Why? Why are you stuttering, Luke?
I didn't stutter.
Okay, now you're quieter. Good. A few decibels lower. Now we can have a civilized conversation. Go on.
No, I appreciate you standing up for yourself.
Oh, you appreciate me standing up for myself, really, after being an arsehole? Shut up, man.
I called you out. You called me out. And here we are. Seriously, though, I can't understand hanging out in a hangout for an hour and finding the entire thing boring. Like, I would never do that.
Speak. No. I was outside. I couldn't speak. I am now inside and able to speak.
Okay, good point. When you make a good point, I want to acknowledge you made a good point. You made a bunch of good points. And what is it that on a larger social, cultural, political, or religious theme that has been occupying your thinking recently?
Yeah. So there's a lot of Romanians in my area. And I thought, you know what? When I first moved into my area, I was kind of fond of them. They're a bit friendly. They can be nice. But the more I live here, the more I've made this my permanent home, this new area, the more I realize I don't actually like them all that much. Their friendliness is kind of annoying. They're quite loud. They're quite brash. I kind of want them all out, but I can't do anything about it because I've got no power. I only have a vote. And I realized how stupid that is in a society when all you have is one vote. When I think to myself, you know what, sometimes my vote should count slightly more than their vote, but I can't do that. I can't actualize that in any real form unless I procure some sort of power over them or over other people. So maybe what my goal should be in life is to procure power so I can get rid of those fucking Romanians downstairs. At least that's what's been occupying my mind recently.
So, are you a big fan of multiculturalism?
Depends on the culture and depends on how multi we're speaking and in what environment.
Which cultures are you a fan of?
Black. I'm a fan of black culture.
And what is it about black culture that you respect and enjoy?
They're loud, they're brash, they're useless at anything else. So they're actually largely harmless. At least in my line of work, they're harmless because I don't really see many of them. And I like how loud and brash they are. They kind of balance out the Romanians to me because the Romanians can be loud and they can be kind of brash, but really they're not. They're just an annoying presence. Whereas the blacks are kind of like do you know when you get stomach acidity and you get like a really bad tummy pain and you take some Gaviscon, or I think if you're in America I think it's called Pepto-Bismol or whatever, and it kind of neutralizes it. That's what I think of blacks in society. You need at least 15% of blacks in society because it neutralizes the boring the boring whites and the boring South Asians, the boring whatever. They add a bit of flavor, but not more than 15% though. Any more than 15% and the ratio's off. Then they become annoying and malicious of their own right. But I don't live in a black area. I live in a kind of a predominant white area with a lot of South Asians mixed into it. So that's why I like this ratio a lot.
So you like blacks as a spice, not as the main course of a neighborhood.
Exactly, as a condiment.
Condiment. Okay, and any other cultures that you respect and appreciate?
I like the Islamic cultures. So whatever racial groups that form one, except funnily enough, except black Muslims. Those two things kind of that's too much. You know, when you have a black and you have a Muslim, that's kind of like putting a hat on a hat. It's a bit pointless. But I do actually. I'm a fan of the Muslims, and I mean real Muslims, not like the one you've got here. Curious Gazelle. I'm the ones who actually practice, like Andrew Tate. I heard his name being mentioned here.
Well, okay, what about Japanese or Chinese culture? Do you respect those?
No, they're just kind of boring, bland. Like they're just kind of there. They're just kind of taking up room. They're compliant. They're kind of there, but like they're like androids.
Dickson really
I
likes
have
Chinese food.
I don't like. Who likes Chinese food?
Dickson.
Oh, yuck! I hate Chinese food. It's gross. It's disgusting. I don't like. I mean, Japanese people are they're benign groups of people. They're kind of there and they take up space and they pay taxes and whatever. But other than that, not a fan. Not a fan of like East. I don't mind Vietnamese people. They're quite nice. I don't mind Southeast Asian people. So people from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. I know they all have Chinese people in their own right, but their Chinese are a little bit different from mainland China Chinese. I think, anyways.
And have you lived overseas?
I've lived in a few countries. I've lived in India. I've lived in the UAE. I've lived about for a month in Malaysia. So that's a significant amount of time in one place, I guess, but not years and years. So yeah, that's about as much as my experience goes.
So how much of your life have you spent living overseas?
I'd say about 8 years.
Okay.
And I'm 25.
Okay. And what are some of the good things and the bad things about living in India?
The good things is, well, I am Indian, so it's close to my culture. Easy to settle in. Bad things, it's very noisy, it's very messy, it's very polluted, it's very corrupt. But I like how hyper nationalistic everyone is in India. I do like how everyone's just really openly bigoted when they are. It's all out in the open. I like that. But the problem in India is everything is out in the open. So is the filth. So is the pollution. So are the people. So that's what I don't like about India. What I liked about the UAE is the number one. What I liked is the Islam. I liked that them first and foremost. Secondly, I like the fact that you can't walk in the UAE. You need to drive, so you'll be boiling if you want to walk from point A to point B. So it forces everyone to drive and not walk. So that means you socialize less with people. I liked how there's a very clear hierarchy in the UAE of who's on top and who's not on top, and everyone is aware of that hierarchy. I like when things are made very clear to me, like who is where and who isn't where. It solves a lot of confusion in society. And what I like about the UK is the people here are nice. I like the weather. I like the cuisine. What I don't like is I don't like Pakistanis. I don't like Romanians. What I don't like the most is people who are Pakistani, but they're kind of detached from their Pakistani identity and detached from their ethno-religious identity, who kind of just spend the whole day on online, just kind of interviewing other people and kind of patronizing them without them realizing, that sort of thing. Not a big fan of that. I don't know why she's laughing, but yeah, that's how I break it down.
How is Indian culture in the UK different from Indian culture in India, in your first-hand experience?
It's more diluted. Indians are a group that assimilate fairly well. I mean, at least I think they assimilate fairly well relative to other groups. So it's diluted. They don't follow their religion as much closely. So they're all functional hypocrites. They're all basically just Westerners, but at the same time, they resent elements of the West. So they're the worst kind of Westerners because they will resent the actual home populace in a very sort of petty way, but at the same time, adopt everything about them, which is the worst because you don't even get a degree of separation from them. So they're a lot like social chameleons. If you're a white person in the UK, you might trust one of them because you think, hey, he acts like me and talks like me and dresses like me and all that kind of. But no, he actually resents you. Whereas what I like about Muslims is they're very openly hostile. You look at one of them and you go, ooh, this is a bad guy. This is not a guy I want to talk to. But at least you know that in your mind. Whereas with Indians, they're very covert. They are very sneaky. They are. Much like another group that's given given the stereotype of being sneaky and being kind of a mercantile in their way they act. I don't want to name the group because I think I'll get struck off if I do. But I think we all we all know who we're talking about.
Luke
yes.
is of that group.
Yeah. Are there any advantages, Dickson, to Indian culture being subdued in the UK? You pointed out the bad things about it. Is there anything good about Indian culture being more subdued in the UK as opposed to India?
Subdued, you mean?
Yeah, at a lower level of intensity.
At least the ones that they choose to follow. They can be quite nice it can be quite personable if you know them, and they generally, I'd say generally, they wish well upon others, even though there's a petty competitive nature. They generally wish well, and they're generally harmless. So typically speaking, if you have enough of them in an area, it might be good for the area if there's like, I don't know, a good relationship between them and the people there. But other than that, they also self-segregate a lot. So it's a give and a take, man. But what I will say is the second, third, and fourth generations typically tend to just attach itself onto the social strain of whichever area they live in. So they just become part of the main group anyway. So you don't have to worry about them causing much trouble in the long run. But other than that, I wouldn't say there's a lot of great things about them that benefits a country like Britain compared to India.
How much anti-Indian prejudice have you encountered in the UK?
Next to zero, almost zero anti-Indian prejudice in my life, especially as I grew around London, where quite often we were very much in the majority or the plurality of which area I lived in. So there was next to no anti-Indian, whatever, except from some other races. So not really from whites, but sometimes from other groups, maybe here and there. But even that's quite harmless, sort of petty kind of things, as opposed to anything serious.
Are there any groups that you absolutely would not marry into?
I would not marry a black, even though I like them. I wouldn't marry into one. I wouldn't. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't marry any group who wasn't Indian. To be fair, it just makes it a lot easier to marry into your own. But in terms of absolute no-nos, I'd say African, Afro-Caribbean. I'd say Somalis. I'd say Middle Easterners. I'd say Southeast Asians, East Asians.
Have you never even fancied a Somali before, though?
I have. In fact, a lot of my crushes in school were Somali. Now that you
Really?
mention it, yes, they were lovely, lovely ladies. But I wouldn't marry them, and they wouldn't marry me either.
What do you like about them? Can you describe any of your crushes? The
Yes,
Somali ones.
they had pretty eyes. They were
Just
they
the
had
eyes.
massive. They had, yeah, pretty eyes, massive foreheads, which I'm a fan of. Um, they they were quite developed. They were quite built, which I liked.
They were
And
curvy.
yeah, well, yeah, they were curvy, but I don't want to
Did
go
they
into
have
that much depth.
did they have
Huh?
no, I want to go into that. Did they have big boobs by any chance?
Yes, they did by chance. Bear in mind, I too was 16 at the time, so I was the same age as them. I'm not being a creep. And yeah, they're also quite nice. They can be quite like vicious, but if they like you, they're quite nice. So if they fancied you, they're quite nice to you, and you're quite nice to them. But other than that, they're quite cultural. So they do follow the set sort of standard of their religion slash culture. And I would like to think that I also follow the set culture and my religious principles. So nothing ever came out of it.
What do you like and dislike in general about women?
I like so what I don't like about women. I mean, to be honest with you, the things that I like about them are also the things that I kind of don't like about them when taken an extreme. So I like how women can be quite nice and sensitive, and they can be quite, they can make you feel certain things. But the problem is when you start feeling them, Luke, you become less rational of a person. You give yourself to them, and the problem is that you build them up into this, like, you idealize them in certain ways, and the problem is they're not that vision of your that you have in your head, so they start becoming non-compliant, and sometimes they do it not because they want to behave a certain way, but because they just want to antagonize you. They just want to go against you. That's all. They don't want to give themselves to you because it feels like total self-surrender. Especially with a lot of girls these days, they have a feeling that if they do that, they're somehow breaking some moral code of their own, like, oh, I can't do this for a guy, blah 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 blah. And yeah, so it makes you feel like a fool at the end of it. But what I like about them, conversely, or whatever the right word is that they are quite soft natured, and most girls, I'd say, even the ones that might seem like they're being arseholes, are actually a lot better as people than most guys are. They've got more to offer. That a lot of them are just lovely. They are just lovely. We know when I go to work, for example, I work in an environment that is 50-50, like male, female. And I like working with women as opposed to men, purely in one sense, because you go to them and it's just pleasant to see a girl. Whether or not they're attractive is almost irrelevant. Just it's pleasant to see a girl. They're just softer, they're nicer, blah blah blah, and they will talk to you and they are chatty and blah blah blah. With men, it's just you say two words and you get on with it. We are not a particularly sociable group.
Do you have like an ideal female archetype?
Yeah, I do. I think of my ideal woman is someone who is, first of all, someone who is chaste, like I am. Someone who, someone who is, again, quite soft-spoken, quite nice, but also, not boring. Because you can cross the territory where there are girls who are kind of nice and soft and whatever, just because they're kind of boring. They've got nothing else going on. I like someone with a bit of verve, with a bit of oomph. Someone who does talk back a little bit, but knows when the appropriate time is to sort of scale it back and realize, you know what, actually, in a relationship as a partner, me and the guy are on the same side, so I shouldn't antagonize him or be hostile towards him every single time. Sometimes I should let the man lead and I should follow, as is prescribed in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Vedas, in pretty much every important text that exists in in humanity. And I like girls who are aware of that, but also I like girls who don't try and placate me, who don't try and just do it because they think I like it, that kind of thing.
Are you able to accurately judge when a woman is interested in you?
No, I am terrible in judging when a woman is interested in me, purely because I say that is I often find out way later when I like by a friend or a colleague who tells me actually this person did actually fancy you and you're an idiot for not realizing that, and I go, oh, but then a part of me thinks actually I did know it at the time, I just didn't want to recognize it and do anything about it because that would take effort, and effort might result in failure. So there's a bit of both. Maybe I'm good at it, maybe I'm not. I just don't know.
When it comes to romance and trying to, date a woman, have you typically erred on the side of passivity or too assertive?
I'm afraid I didn't hear that.
Yeah. Have you typically erred on the side of passivity or aggression with regard to pursuing women?
I wait until they pursue me. So I haven't been in a ton of relationships, like whatever. But a lot of the times I have come close to one. It's often because a girl has shown her interest in me, and I pretend like I didn't understand it for a long time. I go, oh, really? You fancy? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, and then I kind of become, so that's passive. That's the passive phase. And then once she's pursued me and I realize actually this girl is quite into me, I become aggressive and I start becoming controlling, and I say, oi, uh, I told you to act this way and you are acting the other way. No, 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 no. And I pursue them aggressively after a period of passivity, I become aggressive. I'm a lot like HIV.
And which tactics have you found to be effective with women, and which tactics have you found to be ineffective?
Practically, there are no tactics that are effective with women, except, like, if I'm being honest with you, anything that's effective with women is tantamount to rape. That's like, in terms of like actually getting them to whatever. Trying to woo them over and blah blah blah. Like they could very, as the gender that receives affection, it becomes very easy to become bored of that. So I don't blame women for the way they are. If I was the person that a bunch of people were pursuing and they had different tactics for it, some people were affectionate, some people were cold and distant, some people blah, blah, blah. If I recognized each and every single one of them as tactics, I would easily detach from every single one of them. I could easily go, actually, I choose someone else, blah, blah, blah. It's very easy for me to do that. So there are no tactics that are effective with every single woman. It just depends on the girl in question. So it depends entirely on the person you're talking to.
And how long is the longest relationship that you've had with a woman?
I'd say a year, 1 year.
And what did you learn from it?
What did I learn from it? I learned that I need to control my emotions, that I need to be able to, even if I'm angry, and I am often angry, to not show the anger to the woman. And more often than not, what they're looking for is a reaction. So if you don't give them that reaction, then they'll just be like, oh, okay, that's weird. He didn't react. Okay, maybe he doesn't care anymore. Blah, 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 and so on and so forth.
So it seems to me, Dickson, that just as men despise fat women, women despise weak men. You think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's that's true. That's correct.
And so where do you need to toughen up to be more successful with women, if anywhere?
To be honest, I think I've already got a pretty good thing going in that I don't really approach women. I don't seek their affection so much. I don't seek their validation. I am somewhat of a narcissist, which means that I oftentimes whatever good things I think about myself self-perpetuate. If anything, if there is something I need to do with women, it's to become slightly less myself and slightly more affectionate in the appropriate times that are needed. But with regards to strength and whether women, I think by and large they're all products of what you are physically as a male, what you can do in terms of how competent you are in the arena that you work in, whether that be finance or academia or entertain, whatever it is. It's a competency hierarchy. It's a physical hierarchy. There is some emotional, psychological things that come into it, but they are all functions of physicality and competency and on its own right. So you just have to work up that ladder to some degree before you can even think about how a woman views you.
Right. So the most disturbing interactions for me are any interactions that make me question my own level of competency. Like that's the most painful, hurtful thing that anyone can say to me is to essentially point out that I'm incompetent in some important area of life. How competent are you at navigating life?
I'd say I'm fairly competent at life. At my
Average,
age,
above average for your age and your
I'd
ethnic
say
group?
above average.
Mhm.
Average for my age. Yeah, I'd say I'm above average.
And in what areas, if any, do you most want to grow, say, in the next 5 years with regard to competence?
Professional competence. I
Mhm.
want to get better at what I do, purely because it will serve me and it will serve the people I'm meant to serve in my job better if I get better at what I do.
So for the last 5 years, I've earned right around 6 figures, sometimes more, sometimes less. If you feel comfortable, how much do you earn?
Okay, so there's a whole. So I'll give you a bit of context. I work as a doctor, but I work in the NHS, so in the UK, and I'm an F1. So this is my first year as a doctor. So my salary is actually pretty pitiful because we don't get paid a lot here. So my salary, roughly, my base salary, so not including extra bonuses and overtime, things like that, is something roughly to £30,000 in my first year of working. It increases a bit, depends on how many night shifts and on calls and extra shifts I do, but realistically, it's a poor salary. Now, poor salaries are a bad thing because no woman wants to be with someone who's not that, whatever. But actually, if there was one profession or a set of professions you can get away with by having a poor salary, it's vocational professions. So professions where you're viewed as having or viewed as doing something noble or whatever by society. So if you're a
Yes.
priest, no one's going to go, oh, you're a brokey, haha. No, everyone's going to go, oh, you're a priest. Well, okay. I mean, it'll be weird for you to make a lot of money. They might even look down on you if you make a lot of money as a priest. If you're or a rabbi or whatever. If you're a doctor, they expect you to make a lot of money, and one day I will, as I progress through my career. But they see you as doing something good for society. At least most people view it as a noble profession. So they might go, oh, well, you're doing something worthwhile. You're helping people out. It almost adds to your nobility that you don't actually make that much by doing it, because then people don't think you're being cynical in how much you practice and how much tests you order and pharmaceutical companies and all that kind of crap. So there's that aspect.
People will treat you with respect. I mean, I would. I mean, you have like significantly leaped in my esteem upon finding out that you're a doctor.
That's the thing. They find out. Number one, and the other thing is, amongst my own colleagues, I also went to a pretty good university, like in terms of where I studied. So even within my cohort of doctors, they'll hear, "Oh, you went here. Oh, okay. So you must." I mean, I'm not saying this is what it actually is, but I'm saying the perception is, "Oh, you must be quite smart then if you graduated from X university or whatever." So ultimately, it's made me realize that a lot of it is just perception-based hierarchies. Not
Wait,
all
but
of it's
that perception's
actual.
based on reality. You are highly intelligent. What are you? 135 IQ?
I have never measured my IQ ever, directly anyways. I've done psychometric tests that kind of overlap with
Mhm.
IQ. as part of university, but I've never actually done an actual IQ test.
And if you were, say, offered $1 million, if you're able to estimate your IQ within 10 points, like what's the most accurate guess that you would make?
I'd say I wouldn't mind saying something. I mean, the funny thing is, I actually don't think my IQ is that high, purely because of my spatial reasoning. So I'd have to say something like 120 to 130, or even 120 maybe. Even that's probably what I think, because I look at the different aspects of an IQ test, and I look at the different aspects of any psychometric test, which is basically a verbal reasoning. You've got quantitative reasoning, but then you've got spatial analysis. I think the spatial reasoning is probably where I'll get docked points. But so I'm happy to say I'm above average IQ, comfortably above average, but I'm not genius level IQ or anything.
What's it like interacting with people who are at least one standard deviation, 15 IQ points higher than you?
That depends, because a lot of times people who are very, very intelligent tend to have just difficulty communicating. So the problem isn't so much that they're smarter. The problem is they actually can't communicate how much smarter they are. So you look at them and you go, this person's a bit of an idiot, actually. But in reality, they're actually very smart. It's just they have a difficult time conveying that to you.
Do you remember? Do you remember the last time you were intimidated by somebody's level of intelligence?
Oh, every day, purely because you work with people who are number one, intelligent, but number two, who are also your seniors. So they've spent a lot more years working than you have. So they know so much more than you, and they know their sort of computing time is a lot shorter than yours, purely because they've worked here for longer. So their brain knows all the shortcuts to take to get to the same outcome that you need to. So every day I'm intimidated by someone who's smarter than me. But at the same time, you become used to recognizing when someone is actually smarter than you and when someone's actually just showing their intelligence as opposed to what they actually have on the inside. So you make that sort of delineation.
Right. And how did you have to grow? Like, how did you have to overcome your own natural tendencies to reach the level that you've reached?
Torturing myself, basically. I think if you go to a really good university and a very competitive course, you're often surrounded by people who just who are competitive, who will make you feel like you're lagging behind in a race before it's even started. So you might do some things to compensate. Sometimes people think I'll just work a bit harder. I've never been a fan of working harder, purely because to me, I can't spend 3 to 4 more times the effort than someone else can. I haven't got that much motivation in me. So what I do is I just think to myself, where am I comfortable being? Where do I want to get to, like in terms of attainment, and what's the quickest path I can get to there whilst conserving as much energy as possible. And for me, that's always been just, you know what, if there was let's say for an exam or for an interview, I need to cover this much content, but then I'll look at myself and say, actually, I only need to cover this much content, a fraction of it, and I'll be able to get through the rest of it. And that's how I allocate. So I allocate my energy appropriately, is what I'd say.
Was the overall British establishment response to COVID better than average, or below average in your estimation?
I'd say below average is below average, yeah.
So I would say above average, but I'm not a doctor. I would say it was above average in that we got a vaccine in a record time, and we had less death than would have been expected. That there was finally the implementation of lockdown procedures, which I believe on average did more good than harm. What's your basis for saying below average?
I think it's partly because purely because the way it was communicated. My issue isn't so much what we did; it's in so much on how it was communicated. So that is also part of the response to COVID. It's a big part of its communication. The UK sucks at PR. It sucks at communicating. It sucks at, and it's part of it's actually the fault of healthcare providers, not even politicians. Part of it's the problem with healthcare providers, honestly. We overstepped our bounds quite early on, and we downplayed it early on, and then we then overcorrected and kind of made it sound so much more serious way too late compared to other European countries. I think overall our response was okay. I think you're right about the vaccine thing. I'm happy that we were able to roll it out quickly relative to other countries. I think in part that has to do with the fact that we are a single provider healthcare system that allows us to negotiate these things a lot quicker than countries that don't function the same way. So the NHS on average is able to negotiate a lot more efficiently than most organizations or most countries can, purely because it's one organization. So it's very unitary in the way that it approaches things. That allowed us to sort of standardize our approach to COVID a lot better than most countries did. But that being said, we did have a lot of casualties early on. But I think that's also a function of our population. We just have a more at-risk population than most countries did. So I wouldn't put much stock into that really in terms of overall deaths. And we recovered quite well from COVID, to be fair, as a country, but it was still below average purely because I think that there's more that we could have done in the way that we communicated our response compared to other countries. Because we love to talk a lot in this nation. That's the issue.
So within about 2 minutes of talking with you, I realized that I liked you and I respected you. At what point did you realize, if ever, that was true, or do you think I'm lying to you?
No, I believe you first and foremost. I think from the moment I spoke, I think you'd like me purely because most people do like me when I speak. So I never doubted that. It's not. So I'd say from minute one, let's say.
And when I tell you I respect you, do you think I'm lying, or do you think I'm telling the truth?
No, I take your word for it. I don't tend to think people have ulterior motives. I believe you, and I think of myself as someone who's worthy of some respect. So they all kind of match.
Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Is there anything that you want to say in our final minute or two?
No. It was a great time. I enjoyed speaking to you, and hopefully I can do that in the future as well. Good luck for the rest of your streaming.
Yeah, thanks, Dickson. I'd really like to have you back, and take care.